This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10. It's not necessarily the most professionally advantageous thing to reveal at the top of the show, but if you would like to continue listening to the Assisted Dying Bill in its entirety, you can do so both on Global Player and on our sister station LBC News. This, of course, is London's biggest conversation. That's what LBC stands for these days. Therefore, you can work out the difference between those two positions for yourself. We're going to have a conversation about this. The good news is, I don't think I've got another monologue in me on this subject. We've discussed it so many times, so powerfully, so movingly, so philosophically, ethically, morally, all of those things. But I don't think I've got anything new to say, which is why my ears pricked up in the office earlier this morning when I heard Henry Riley, with whom you will be familiar and whom you probably know, visited the Netherlands last week to dig a little deeper into the whole issue of assisted dying, the Netherlands being something of a pioneer in this space for some time. And he was speaking with uncommon passion about a shift in thought. So I thought, why not start the programme by hearing a little more from Henry? You have had your, shall we say, eyes widened.
I have, and my view has changed drastically, I would say, after the visit to the Netherlands, because I think the sort of case in the UK is we have this sort of British etiquette where we don't really talk about death. It's seen as some way as being uncouth in a way, and it's something that isn't discussed regularly. And certainly if I was to what we refer to as voxing, i.e. speak to members of the public out and about in central London, I would not have got the reception that I did in central Amsterdam, in central Utrecht, because people were all too willing to talk with me about it, about not just the issue of death, but also about euthanasia and assisted suicide. And what was interesting as well is we were only there for a couple of days, so I didn't spend ample time in pubs and bars, but even the sort of brief time I was there, you would hear people having these conversations. They were aware that the UK was having a vote on the issue, and you hear people speaking about family members, about friends, about some of the current debates going on in the Netherlands when it comes to assisted dying. Those debates at the moment are primarily mental health cases, in particular women in their 20s who are choosing to end their own life as a result. You also have there is a debate at the moment. One MP there wants to make it an automatic right for anyone over the age of 75 to be able to end their own life. So it's a much different debate, a much more advanced stage. And James, I just wanted to play you some of the interactions I had this was in central Utrecht.
When someone doesn't really can't really live, I think it should be an option, but purely on what the patient wants, or the next to kin. It was my grandma. She suffered with cancer for a very long time, and she decided just let me sleep, no food, no nothing, just let me sleep, so she could pass away very peacefully. Without any pain.
I think that it should be legal, but only in a way we have it here in the Netherlands, because it's a very difficult process to get anesthesia, because you need the doctors and psychiatry, and it's a very long process. But I think, it's for some people a beautiful way, and especially elderly people, so young people. It depends on the situation, but it's not like I want to die. So it needs to be a long process, but I think it should be legal.
I'm really pro, because I think it's a good thing, and it's really strict. It's really bound by rules, so it's not like, I think I want to die, and then somebody helps you. It's only when you are really ill, and then it's not easy to get it anyway.
So you found your mind changing or your position hardening, crystallising, partly because the visit to the Netherlands removed slippery slope fears, or removed the thin end of the wedge argument, which is being made repeatedly in the House of Commons as we speak.
Yeah, and it's made in the UK very. I understand why people make the point, and it's very understandable. But there, it was totally removed. You're right, and I think because it's been legal there for so long, James. It was 2002 when the law was introduced. You've got, one of the cases over there, for instance, duo euthanasia is now on the rise, which is effectively effectively where couples want to end their lives together. And one interesting example that people talk about is a man called Dries van Acht, who used to be the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, strict Catholic, very anti-euthanasia. He this year decided to end his own life with his wife at the age of 93. So even previous opponents are in favour. And also, I spoke with a doctor while I was out there who has performed euthanasia when it was illegal. They were having 3,000 cases a year on average before it was made legal in 2002. And so it made sense to make that legal over there. But the whole argument about I'll be honest, James, I was totally convinced by the whole thing, by the mental health argument, which going in, the idea that someone in their 20s, physically healthy, as you would say, yes, would end their own life, I found almost horrific. Yeah. It is horrific, but I couldn't really countenance it. But listening to the arguments, I totally understand now. And the case that was put to me is of Aurelia Brouwers, who a few years ago decided to end her own life. She tried to kill herself on 20 occasions. On 3 of those occasions, she ended up getting into a critical condition and couldn't get over the line, so to speak. Oh. And by doing this way, she was given a death where it was checked by 2 psychiatrists, by 2 doctors. She was surrounded by her friends and family. And for me, that was an argument that I totally understood.
Because the trauma is almost incalculable. And of course, the medical responsibility upon professionals when she fails in her bid to end her own life is to do everything within their power to restore her to health, to restore her to the life she no longer wants to live.
Absolutely.
So in some ways that argument has done a 180, hasn't it? Because you sort of think, well, the mental health element of this is something, and there's no suggestion at the moment that the bill that MPs are expected to vote on at 2:30 today will include this kind of case or this kind of context. It's clearly for the terminally ill with prognosis of 6 months left to live. But it's interesting that your visit and your actual conversations with real people about real issues has moved you so much, because the mental health argument historically is, well, you might change your mind. But that shouldn't necessarily apply to any one person more than it should apply to any other.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, James, because here, as you say, it is with 6 months to live, effectively, a terminal illness, whereas there, they worded the legislation, and it hasn't changed in over 20 years since it's been there, that you must be enduring unbearable suffering with no sign of improvement. Yeah. That is the key phrase they use. And that obviously applies to mental as well as physical health cases. And in 2010 there were 2 cases of what they call psychiatric euthanasia, where people went because of mental health reasons. Last year, that was 138, including a 17-year-old who was enduring this unbearable suffering. It is down to 2 doctors, 2 psychiatrists to back up that they feel that they agree with the person that it is unbearable suffering. And over there, I have to say, it's something which I was totally convinced by.
Well, do we know why it is so easy for Dutch people to converse so freely and clearly about an issue that, as you say, and I suspect you're right, and I suspect you probably tried, that in this country we would sort of clam up or cross the road or sort of nervously chuckle and then say something pointless.
One of the interviews we did when we were out there was with a freelance journalist whose mother decided to end her own life a couple of years back. She was 90 years old. And we had this conversation beforehand. She very kindly invited us to her home. She writes for The Guardian in the UK, but writes for a range of Dutch print newspapers as well. And she was joking with us before that the reason you haven't had this debate, the reason you put it off for so long, is because of British culture. It's because of this idea. And we were even saying, she offered us a cup of tea, for example, and we were running late, and I was even saying, I'm not too sure. And she was going, do you want a cup of tea or not? Yes or no? Would a cup of tea make your morning better? And it's that sort of directness, James, which I think, ranges everything from having a cup of tea over there to actually discussing issues like euthanasia. And I mean, the clip you heard then, just on the street speaking with people, the other clip I wanted to play you is a rabbi who we spoke with, who we were speaking with about a completely different issue. But I asked her if I could talk with her about euthanasia. And I think it's interesting because you've got the word beautiful came up. A few people I spoke with, they describe euthanasia as beautiful. Incidentally, that's the same word that was used by the rabbi Marianne von Prague.
People don't come very easily to the solution of choosing to die. But if you're desperate enough, if you're in pain enough, it's a gift. And then when you're there and I'm not assisting because I'm not actively doing anything, but they allow me to be there. It sounds strange, but it's very beautiful because people can be at peace. They can get away from their suffering. It's a big, big gift.
That's fascinating. And I mean, a little contrary to the conversation still being conducted in this country. I don't know that I've heard anybody try and, I could be wrong, frame it in those sorts of terms. It's more been a sort of necessary sadness as opposed to a kind of liberating gift.
That's exactly the thing. They see it as a positive thing as opposed to mitigating a negative. And the best way that it was put, again, with the language barrier, is they said, I see euthanasia as a way of shortening death, as a way of making death more palatable. And I thought that was a really interesting way of, instead of this argument that you have to prolong life, it's about shortening suffering, shortening death. And I thought that was a really interesting, enlightening way to put it.
I can't remember the last time that you went on a job and came back in such a mood, such a kind of position of conviction, having your convictions changed. In a way, that's slightly worrying. Not you personally, but because the stakes are so high, the issue is so huge. But if you were an MP, and this was something Natasha mentioned to me yesterday, that people are going into the debate today having not made up their mind. And that's the only way the decision can be made is with humans thinking and then expressing the conclusions of their thoughts. And that's why I wanted to listen to you today, because you have been on precisely the sort of journey, and you could have ended up with different experiences in a different destination, that MPs are, or at least all of the responsible MPs will be embarking on today.
And what was interesting, James, just on that, is they were very aware of the UK legislation, and actually the most sort of forceful proponents of euthanasia over there and assisted suicide are actually anti the legislation in the UK. Some see it as obviously a welcome step that can be amended, and like in Canada, where the ink was sort of barely dry and they changed it. I think the idea that it's just done for 6 months, they see that as quite arbitrary. The idea that it has to be terminal, again, arbitrary, when the culture over there is, it's not about just helping terminal people, it's about giving people the choice. It's a positive step. So they weren't actually completely sold on the debate in the UK.
So people could be opposed to the legislation that's going to be before the Commons at 2:30 today, from both sides of the argument. You cite the Dutch example where people think that the legislation is inadequate and suboptimal because it doesn't go far enough. And then you've got the moral arbiters in the Commons today who will be arguing that it goes too far.
It's fascinating.
It really and you're right. And you've made it fascinating, to be fair, and more fascinating than I've managed to in previous weeks, which I'm so glad I was eavesdropping on your conversation earlier today. Vinny writes, Henry Riley is fast becoming a journalistic legend, absolutely loving his analysis and his work. And there are quite a few messages like that coming in to the studio. So I should remind everybody that Henry now has his own programme on LBC at 4:00 on Sunday morning. So you know,
checks in the post.
That's the big time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Henry, and he also reminds us of the third option in the conversation that we're about to have, which is the arguably, according to some polling in the Telegraph today, which is the most popular position in this country at the moment, which is to be broadly in favour of assisted dying per se, but to actually be keen to see a pause in the current legislation. I don't think that's an option that the Commons will have today. This is it isn't, is there? There's the yes lobby and there's the no lobby. You can stay on your benches, but if you do, your vote doesn't really contribute to the conclusion. It either passes or it fails, this legislation. I think it's likely to pass, not by hundreds of votes, possibly by somewhere between 40 and 60. But the public wants the assisted dying bill to be paused so that an inquiry can be conducted into improving palliative care, says one poll. So there are three answers to the question. But if you were an MP today, you've only got two options, really. I mean, you could abstain, I suppose, and I should introduce that to the conversation. But the length of the introduction to this vote depends entirely on what you do now. I'm more than happy to come back from this junction and just start taking your votes. If you were an MP, what would you do today? Vote for it, vote against it, or abstain? If you don't want to cast your vote yet, then you will get another monologue. So it's on you entirely. What happens next? 0345 6060 973. I'll tell you what I think I would do, but as Henry has just demonstrated, there is no point having a mind if you never change it.
James O'Brien on LBC.
extraordinary, and would never have known it without Henry's contribution to the programme this morning. But the debates we've been having on the programme, in fact, I think, and I haven't listened to all of them, obviously, but I think all of the conversations that we've had on LBC, and there's probably been more phone-ins on this subject in the last month than anything else, have been conducted in a kind of crucible that is utterly different from the one that we'd have been in had we been Dutch. That last bit of our exchange about the use of the word beautiful, the introduction of the word beautiful to the debate is traffic stopping. Given the conversations that we've had about it, I've struggled to know what I would do. I've struggled to know what I want to be done. I've struggled to find fruitful ways into the conversation. I don't know that it is a decision that can be based entirely upon people's personal experiences of unbearable suffering. But that idea that what is on the agenda potentially is a thing of beauty absolutely blew my mind. And that's why Henry came back from the Netherlands in such a position in that, I don't know quite what the word is. It's not a mood, it's not a state, but I haven't seen him like that before. I haven't, and I've known him a while now. Even though he looks 11, I've never seen him before so personally engaged in something, because like all great journalists, he normally manages to rise above the fray. But that I just thought that was fascinating. So what would I do before we hit the phones? There's one line free at the minute if you want to grab it. 0345 60 60973. You need to tell me what you do and why. I'm somewhat embarrassed to tell you that I think that in the course of the last few hours, I've shifted from being in favour but not necessarily, but would probably vote against it in its current form. It doesn't become law, by the way, at 2:30 today. It could be finished if this bill is voted down. But if it is passed, then there's lots more parliamentary activity before it gets close to the statute book, to voting in favour of it as a step in the right direction rather than as the end. Well, listen, as Frank Zappa famously observed, a mind is like a parachute, as David reminds me. It doesn't work if it isn't open. But sometimes the openness of your mind can feel like a burden because your pendulum is swinging like nobody's business. 10 is the time. How would you vote? That's the crucial question. You go through the yes lobby or you go through the no lobby. How would you vote and why? Gemma's in Middlesbrough. Gemma, what do you think?
For me, wholeheartedly, yes.
Straight through the eyes.
Oh, with absolute conviction, yeah. So I am actually a religious studies teacher in a secondary school. I'm not religious myself, but part of this debate does come into our curriculum, and it's something that we talk about at length. But at the side of that, I've also worked in the NHS, including hospices, for the past 15 years. So I have seen firsthand what the end looks like when the end isn't pleasant.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll never.
So it's like a sentence. We're sentencing people to misery by not passing this legislation.
I think if you see somebody in the suffering to the extent, and there's one patient who will always stick in my mind, who had an ulcerative tumour that was grown from his rectum. Right. And there was obviously, apart from pain relief, and I've got to say, our hospices and our hospice care in this country is incredible. Yes. And while I would agree with this bill, with great passion, with equal passion, I would support the need for the improvement and in terms of funding.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, isn't it? The way it's almost been framed as either or, when it doesn't. It really doesn't have to be. That the only fly in the ointment of that position is that countries where they have it have been shown to have not made the investments in palliative care that countries where it doesn't exist have. But that's not. You don't get an ought from an is just because that's been the experience in other countries doesn't mean it would have to be the experience here.
And I think the opportunity to learn from other countries and how other countries have brought these things in and what they've done, it's a learning opportunity. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And I think, we can sort of, without making the waters muddier, we're going to like it to the abortion debate. Just because we have like an abortion, yes, in this country, doesn't mean that it's something that everybody would do. So to, our hospices and the work that I've done, it's incredible, and it's the best job that I've ever had. I loved it, because you do really make a difference to those families where hospice care is the right place, and to the patients, of course. However, when you see patients who literally are begging to die, and the pain and the pain of the family as well, who do not want to see their family members suffer, it's devastating. It's really devastating.
So it's a yes, without any hesitation for you. Briefly, what did you think about that when Henry spoke to that rabbi and they introduced the word beautiful into the conversation?
It reminds me, one of the things that I show quite controversially to my students at GCSE is the documentary that Terry Pratchett did a good few years ago now, called Choosing to Die. And Terry Pratchett was in a bit of a different situation because obviously he has Alzheimer's, and part of the assisted dying in Switzerland is that you have to have the mental capacity to make that decision yourself. And he didn't in the end choose that, but we did watch a guy called Peter Smedley die, and I do share this with my students. And that death that you see in that show and that documentary is beautiful. He's with his wife, he's at peace, he's calm, he knows exactly what it is that he's wanting to do, why he wants to do it. And I think if anybody's not sure, that's a great place to start.
So you were less surprised by that word than I was then, because it has been missing from most of the conversations I've heard in this country about this bill.
Yeah. I think the most shocking thing for me probably is from that was the fact that it came from a rabbi, which I think is brilliant, that, the religious discourse is being opened up to be more understanding of the need for assisted dying. I think that's brilliant.
Well, it made a bit of a muppet of my position earlier in the week that it would be impossible for any subscriber to an Abrahamic religion to be in favour of this sort of legislation. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm wrong, but the fact that a rabbi is completely on the opposite side of the conversation means that I'm certainly not easily proved 100% right. Gemma, thank you. I bet you're a brilliant teacher. I love the way that you're so engaged in the issues that you're talking about, and communicating that to the children in your charge does them an enormous service. 27 minutes after 10 is the time. Speaking of education, and you mentioned Terry Pratchett, the Terry Pratchett fan who, or rather the listener to this programme who introduced me to Terry Pratchett, would you believe, has been in touch. Emma writes, what you guys discovering that death can be beautiful are actually telling me is that you all never had a goth phase. Sian is in Holstead in Essex. Sian, what made you pick up the phone?
Really, it's because of your comments about Holland, because my husband died of pancreatic cancer about 5 months ago.
I'm sorry.
I'm a retired GP,
right.
And so I have had a fair amount to do with people dying.
Yes.
I actually was able to be at his death because I was able to keep him at home, despite quite a large lack of the terminal care we could have done with,
right,
because of poor services. But he died with me holding his hand, and that was terribly important to me, and it was a calm death in the end. But he had 4 weeks of not pain, which we could control, but terrible vomiting very frequently, and couldn't eat anything for 4 weeks and couldn't drink for a week. And I felt so sorry for his distress in that, and I couldn't do anything about it. I had told him that I wouldn't be able to push his death forwards because I loved him, and also because I would have ended up in prison, quite rightly at the moment. But
as it legally, that would be the correct implication of the law. But you would have welcomed the option.
Yeah, he would have welcomed it.
Yes.
His father actually took assisted dying in California the year before, and was very grateful to be able to do it. He had prostate cancer in 1993.
We're quite behind the curve on this, aren't we? Or ahead of the curve, which whatever you prefer. But I was struck by Henry's point about it being a conversation we've conducted in quite a Victorian way. We have an odd relationship with death in this country. As a GP, you're probably closer to that than I am.
Yeah. Although, I have to say that over the years, and you don't see many dying people as a GP, and most of them are very old and not a sound mind, and so they wouldn't be eligible for this law.
Yes.
But you pretty often are therefore involved in conversations with family about how much they are very upset that their family member has to suffer so much and for so long. Terminal care can be very good for a lot of things, and I have seen it. We used to do it really well in the practice, but 10 years of attrition of resources in the NHS has really made a difference. In our area, there's no continuity,
right?
And also there's no overnight advice from the local hospice either, which is very unfair.
Which feeds in a little to the Health Secretary's position that he might well be in favour of the legislation in an ideal world, but with the NHS in the state that it's currently in, he worries, as Wes Streeting has explained, that people might go down this path when they wouldn't do if the care situation was better. But it doesn't. So if you were voting today, you would be in that eye lobby.
I would vote in favour of this law. It's very limited, and it probably won't help as many people as perhaps in the future it might be a good thing. But it's a toe in the water, and I think it will help some people. And that's no reason for Wes Streeting to not agree to it. I think he's hiding behind that argument because he needs to put lots more money into the NHS, and particularly terminal care, and get it stabilised. But that's no reason not to go ahead and allow people a human right
I hear you.
to choose their time of death and their way of death. Because although terminal care, even if it's expensive, and it is better in this country than most, I do think,
right.
It is still not able to deal with every symptom effectively.
Of course.
People don't, they talk like it is, and it's not. And what I do think also is that probably it would be better if it was a specialist service who was doing it, with the ability to opt out of getting involved in it if you're another sort of doctor.
Yes, well, that is yet to be established. I think some of that. And the parliamentary process will dot some of the I's and cross some of the T's, and no doubt raise some questions that are yet to be answered. Sean, I'm so sorry for your loss, but I suppose very grateful for your contribution. I just wish you weren't in such a well-qualified position to have made it. 33 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:36 is the time. The conversation continues. The thing I've found hardest and in conducting these conversations, and I mean on a purely personal, professional level, is trying to steer the debate away from very specific personal experiences. It's really hard to do without sounding as if I'm saying, please don't ring me with your heartbreaking stories of losing people that you love and miss desperately. I'm not doing that today. Today there's room for both. But I do want to remind you that most MPs choosing a lobby to pass through today will not necessarily be doing so with the memory of a loved one fresh in their minds or their memories. I've never been through this. I've been through it with a very, very, very good friend, but the decision was not one that I would have been involved in, even if the option to avail himself of assisted dying had been there. And that's a relatively recent experience for me. So if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, I would have nothing to draw on except the testimony of public figures who have often very bravely waded into this debate. So that the MPs today have to make a decision that is going to be based on thinking. And that position is the one that I have tried to explain, I think is missing from a lot of phone-ins. But not this one, hopefully. Because if you are coming at this entirely based on thought or conviction or religious belief, as we touched on a little earlier in the week, because of the Justice Secretary's, I felt, quite courageous intervention, If you were voting today and your vote would be based entirely on thinking and hopefully listening, then what would you do? And there's room on the switchboard for you. Okay, I mean, absolutely not rolling up the welcome mat for people who are coming at it from very personal perspectives. But I do want to get a proper hearing for people who are doing what most MPs will be doing today on both sides of the debate. Some drawing on their religion, some drawing on their intellect, some drawing on both. What would you do if you had a vote today and your decision was going to be based entirely on thinking about it, as opposed to thinking of something that you've watched someone else go through? All right, 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to do that. Hopefully we'll have room and time, but as ever, or almost as ever on this programme, there are a lot of people waiting to speak, including Ian, who's in Brighton. Ian, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James. I thought I'd just call you with a story of personal loss and tragedy, as you've just no. I lost my sister last year to metastatic bowel cancer. She was living in Australia, so had the advantage of an assisted dying option. But I wanted to bring to you a slightly different angle to the story, which, listening to your debate, I feel hasn't come up. She had that option and chose to take that option, but didn't use it when the time came.
Okay.
So the way it works out there is you're given effectively a kit that you take home that you can mix yourself. You're shown how to mix it and nobody else is. So it's very personal to you, and you have the choice to take that at the time that suits you.
So she had it there?
Yeah. So she had it there.
Oh, that's
she had
fascinating.
Lockbox in the cupboard, had it ready to go. And what was so important about that was she was an incredible woman, and she faced her entire journey through cancer with such grace and such power. But the one thing she really was fearful of was that real pain, that potential for real pain at the end. And the palliative care over there, her health cover was extraordinary. She had the best possible cover, but she really feared.
That's two things that I don't think I'd heard cited before, because of the lens through which the story is examined being so inalienably British. So the Dutch experience that Henry explained, which introduced, perhaps shockingly, the word beauty to the conversation, and then you describing the Australian experience, which spares you the pain of thinking about the pain becoming unbearable, like, the mental toll, the psychic agony of knowing that when the pain did become unbearable, you would have no choice but to endure it. Your sister knew that she would have the choice not to.
Exactly.
Wow.
What that gave us, James, was 6, maybe 8 months to really connect, to really spend time, to enjoy the last moments we had together without that hanging over us. It took that fear away.
For everyone, because you wouldn't want to watch her in agony any more than she would want to be in agony. Yes, I can well imagine.
I was petrified of seeing that pain in her, and it took it away. And I cannot put a value on that. And that's why I would vote yes unequivocally today. And
probably leaning towards the position that Henry articulated so well at the top of the show, which would be the commonplace perspective in the Netherlands, which would be that if there are faults with this legislation, it's that it is a little bit mealy-mouthed and a little bit too committed to compromise. It doesn't actually go far enough.
I think that's true, and I think it's important that, given the nature of, as you said, the way the debate is handled in this country, the way we as Brits talk about these things, we can't start with the full Monty, as it were. No, James, go on. Before I go, I just want to dust off my A-level Christian theology, if I may. And just say that I think there's space when discussing the sanctity of life for both quantity but also quality of life. So I would say that actually your thoughts about the Abrahamic religions, there is space within that theology to suggest that a concentration on quality of life, therefore space for assisted dying, would also work under the sort of Vatican II Catholic Christian dogma.
Well, we could now be here for the next 2 hours and 20 minutes debating the Second Vatican Council. I'm not sure that I agree with you entirely, but yeah, I mean, that is why they have Vatican councils, because the Christian dogma, Christian doctrine can change, can evolve over changing nature of the world, albeit that the ex cathedra bits, the bits that the Pope says ostensibly as a channel through which God's word passes, those are the bits that can't be challenged. But I think Ian would probably win that debate. 10:43 is the time. Karen is in Stoke-on-Trent. Karen, what would you like to say?
Hello. Thanks for having me on. I'm ringing from a professional perspective. Actually, I'm a nurse,
right?
And I quite often nurse a lot of patients who are end of life, who are we nurse them, and a lot of them are drowning on their secretions. We give them medications to try and alleviate that, and also a lot of the pain control as well. And we see them suffering, and the families really see them suffering, and the families often ask us, how long have they got left, and we can't put a time on.
How would you vote today?
Well, I'm still very much on the fence, to be honest.
Yeah, but you've got to vote at 2:30.
I know. I don't know. I wouldn't like to say because.
Well, that's what you've got to say. That's what the entire phone-in is about.
I know, but we see people suffering all the time. With drowning on their secretions, and they are suffering.
I know. I fully appreciate. So, how would you vote at 2:30 today? Oh, you're allowed to abstain.
I would probably abstain, to be honest.
Okay, we've had a retired GP on. You're a nurse. The retired GP clear in her conviction that this is legislation that should be passed. You, as a nurse, would choose to abstain today if you were moonlighting as a member of Parliament.
I really just don't know which way I would go, to be honest, because we see patients suffering. The families often sort of say, they just want them to,
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, we are all, as a consequence of all the conversations that have been had over the last few months, we are all completely aware of what you described, the tension between what people want and what society allows them to do, whether the people you're talking about are the patients or the family members. I wonder whether the coercion angle has been overplayed somewhat. We should perhaps have asked Henry about how that was dealt with in Holland, the idea that bad people would persuade parents or grandparents to end their lives prematurely because it would be financially advantageous, or the call we took last week because the carer, so to speak, was tiring of the burden of care. So although there may not have been any immediate financial advantage to the premature death, there would have been a great easing of responsibility, burden and exertion for the carer charged with looking after the elderly person. And we spoke to someone who clearly believed that their mother had been coerced into euthanasia because another family member had had enough of looking after her. It is 10:45. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What would you do if you had to vote today? 0345 6060 973. And I'm particularly interested in hearing from people who are basing their position entirely on thinking, listening, working through what you've heard. And a couple of those coming in via text. On the calls I've heard today, I will be 100% voting for this bill, says David. But, I have to remind you that if I'd set this conversation up differently, I would have got very different calls. And that's why I'm fascinated by the dilemmas that the MPs face today. We're a country that I think is married now to the idea that all MPs are awful. It's not true. You can see today with the reaction of party leaders to malfeasance in their ranks that politicians are not the same. But we have become inured to the idea that they're all awful and they're all as bad as each other. Days like today, you're really reminded of their humanity. And some of them will, as with all cross-sections of humanity, some of them will behave abominably, some of them will behave selfishly, some of them will behave immorally, some of them will prioritise morality ahead of the pain of other people, some of them will wrestle with this issue. And if you're a wrestler, then I'd like to hear from you before 11 o'clock today. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:50 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Matt makes a brilliant point. He says, basing my decision on listening to Kim Leadbeater talking to Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell, I would vote for the terminally ill adults end-of-life bill. Now, how arresting is his language at the end of that message? Did it stop and make you go, why is he calling it that? Because there's another message from Matt. I presume it's the same Matt. He says we need to stop calling it the assisted dying bill because that feeds into the disinformation that it could apply to disabled people or those with mental health conditions. Call it the terminally ill adults end of life bill, and it does feel different in your brain. But, of course, we began the conversation with Henry Riley's experiences in the Netherlands, which opened his eyes to the efficacy of extending this offer, this freedom, this liberty to many, many more people than the legislation being debated in the House of Commons today would admit. So I told you it was complicated. And that perhaps is why so many people have described themselves as being broadly in favour of the principle, but deeply concerned about the practice and the practicalities to the point where they might be minded to either vote against it or vote for some sort of pause. And I think it's important to remember this, although the wisdom of making it a free vote, I think, becomes clear when you remember that the actual Secretary of State for Health is minded to vote against it because he worries that the NHS isn't in a good enough condition to allow people to make this choice with complete objectivity. Although Sian, a retired GP who lost her husband to pancreatic cancer within the last year, finds that a very unsatisfactory position from Wes Streeting and possibly even a disingenuous one. 10:52 is the time. Sally is in Islington. Sally, what would you like to say?
Hello, hi. I have been listening to your shows and others' shows, and I started listening to the debate today.
Yes.
I've been thinking about this for a few weeks, and indeed a few years. I'm a Catholic,
and
I think there's been a lack of people of all of the Abrahamic faiths speaking out on this because we're all discussing it amongst ourselves.
Okay.
And my view, I'm a Catholic, but I'm a Londoner, and I'm a good time girl, right?
Yes. Okay.
I'm anti-abortion, but I argue with people in the Catholic Church saying, on the one hand, I'm an anti-abortion if you just get pregnant. We've all had a drunken night, but I haven't done it myself and wouldn't have for myself even as a young woman.
Yes.
But if you've been raped or it's incest, something like that, then I think fair enough, or the child's going to be disabled.
Okay.
So I'm a bit of a weird Catholic, but I'm dead
I think you're
you're
actually pretty much the normal Catholic on some elements of this, but the idea that you have to be 100% signed up to every syllable of doctrine has always seemed to me a little unlikely. But anyway, back to the...
I'm a Catholic because it's great for me. It's great for me. It's great for me. It gives me so much peace.
So assisted dying, you can say it's not for me because of my faith, but does it propel you to a position where you can say, I don't think anyone else should be allowed to do it either?
This is my view.
Yeah.
This is my view. If the bill goes through today, I'll respect it as a citizen.
Okay.
And if you're ill and that's what you want to do, then you go ahead and do that. But for me personally, if you're asking my opinion, I think you're making a grave mistake. Because for me, I fear God's judgment more than I fear man or law. And I'm reading a book at the moment called I never remember the name of the book, but it's by Jonathan Sumption.
You don't know what God's judgment would be.
No, I don't, but I fear it more.
But he might. What if God gets cross with you for telling other people that they can't end their misery and torture?
Well, that's my sin that I'll have to deal with, isn't it? I'm standing by in my word of God's word. Now, I'm reading a book about law and politics and law, and the failure of law and politics for the state by Jonathan Sumption, right?
Yeah.
And it got me thinking. It got me thinking that us as citizens, we want to make these decisions, and then we run via the tabloids, via the media, to the politicians who make these decisions for us. We're supposed to be a Christian country. We're not putting any of it on morals. We're doing it on ill-informed general population.
You're wrong.
And then we're making these...
No,
well, maybe
wrong.
I am wrong,
No,
but I'm giving you my opinion. And my thing is that then we get the lawyers to deal with it, and then when people are
lots of people are citing their faith
without a paddle, everyone wants to pray to God. And for me, we're making a mistake. But if that's what you want to do, go ahead and do it. But for me personally, I would be voting against it. If I was a politician, as you said, if I was moonlighting today as a politician, I'd be voting against it. And the reason why? You're trying to call out politicians who are not
You might have talked the bill out, actually, Sally.
Right, but people are trying to call out politicians. Oh, that politician.
No, they are. Lots of them are mentioning their religion.
That politician's a Muslim. Maybe they are and they're not. But for me, if I was a politician, I'd be bringing my religion into it. That's what I want
lots
to
of them are. That's why you're wrong. when you said that none of them are. Lots of them are. I mean, and it would have to pass.
But they're being shouted down by all these sob stories. I've got a friend who died of
They're not being shouted down.
I saw him.
They're not being.
It's not nice.
No, they're not being shouted down. And of course, for it to get through the House of Lords, which it would have to do to become law, the bishops all sit in the House of Lords. Albeit not the Catholic bishops, it's the left footers.
Exactly. You asked about people's opinions. I'm just giving mine.
Well, I'm grateful, but you know how this show works. I mean, your opinion has to be backed up by facts and evidence, which kind of makes the word of God inadmissible. So it's valid in the formation of your opinion, but as being facts or evidence that might persuade anybody else or change anybody else's mind, worthless. And I mean that very kindly, as someone else raised very much in the Catholic faith. It's a big moment when you realise you can use your religion to decide what you believe, but you want to use it to decide what other people can and can't do. You've got a problem, which is why I salute Sally for saying if it becomes law, what was it Jesus said about taxes? Give back to Caesar. What is if it becomes the law of the land in which you live, then there is a religious argument that you are bound to abide by it. Sally, God bless. Chris is in Mountain Ash. Sounds like a spring water, Chris. What would you like to say?
So I'm a nurse. I've been looking after patients now for a number of years, and I've seen end of life, and I've seen patients that have asked or that would wish to go at the time of their choosing, and haven't been able to. We've had to suffer, and their children have had to watch them deteriorate, and they've had to, I've had to sit there and take their frustrations and allow them to swear at me, and they've apologised. I say, you swear at me because you don't need to swear at your children. They don't need to see you like that. And gosh. I've seen a lot of that over the years, and I think if someone wants to, then they should be able to end their life.
How strongly do you feel this?
I feel this very strongly.
I thought you did. So what you're describing is arguably quite barbaric, isn't it? Forcing people to go through what you're describing.
Yeah, it is. And I think if there is a terminal condition that, gives 6 months left to live, and that is going through 2 consultants, then the checks are there.
The safeguards are sufficient, and the conversation about what happens next. I don't think this would be the end of it, but the thing that's changed most for me is the realisation that I no longer think that this not being the end of it is a bad thing necessarily. This is the first step towards a better place. It's a massive step, a huge step, but it won't be the last step, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I think that, giving someone the dignity to go out on their own terms is a huge step and would be a massive step for us as a country.
Yeah, and which is why some people have been a bit confused by the scale and quantity of the coverage. I mean, obviously we haven't, but I've always tried to acknowledge people swimming in a slightly different direction. That's why it's such a huge story, because it is a genuinely epochal shift in a society. I want to squeeze in Phil in Stockport before the news. Phil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
I began this process thinking that I was against the terminally ill adults bill.
Yes.
And the reasons for that were that I thought that people might feel coerced, even subtly.
Yeah.
Thinking that
I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a burden.
That's exactly the point.
Yeah.
I also thought that we need to be concentrating on palliative care, getting that sorted out in the way that Wes Streeting says. But listening to the debate, listening to Kim Leadbeater,
yes,
and listening to LBC extensively,
yes,
and also speaking to my MP, I've changed my mind.
Right.
And the reason for that is because this is the second reading. It's not the end, as you just said. It's going to get, if it gets through today, it's going to go through lots of scrutiny. There could be amendments that might tie up those things, and MPs will get the chance again to look at it once those changes have, if they are made, and then come to a decision. So at this stage, if I were an MP, I'd be saying yes today. It's not that I'm going to say yes completely. I want to look at it further. I don't think we've had enough time to debate the issue properly, and we need to look at
and we won't get as much time as we would if it was a government bill. The fact that it's a private member's bill is for some people suboptimal, but it's not as if a guillotine drops at 2:30 today or 2:35 today, and we're stuck with that decision forever. I love the way you described it, and in fact, anybody who sort of thought when you said, and I've listened to LBC a lot, who might have thought that was an invalid contribution, obviously hasn't been paying attention, because Alicia Kearns stood up earlier today and talked about how her position had been informed by presenting a phone-in programme on LBC. So that's an indication of how, on both sides of this microphone, these kinds of conversations can be of benefit to the open-minded, Phil.
The other thing that concerns me today is that a certain section of MPs may use this as an excuse to blame the Human Court of Human Rights and vote no just because they want to make a political point. And
even though it's a bogus political point, any court, regardless of its jurisdiction or its geographical location, would have the job of interpreting the legislation that is decided by Parliament, but no prizes for guessing the kind of politician who would seek to smuggle in a personal, divisive hobby horse, even on an issue as profound and as important as this. Phil, thank you. It's 11:01.
James O'Brien on LBC.
5 minutes after 11. Hi, James. Right, it's David. I wish more issues could be discussed the way this has generally been conducted. Strong views on both sides, understandably, but the vast majority of contributors on lots of programmes I've heard have been very respectful. It will never catch on, David, although it would be nice if it could be applied to the conversation that we're going to have next. Nice, but I think close to impossible, myself included. Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary, has resigned after it was revealed that she had received a conviction of fraud long before she became an MP, or before she became an MP. It's a very strange story, this, which I think we will try to make sense of today. It's strange for a number of reasons, chiefly, I think, because Keir Starmer knew all about this prior to becoming Prime Minister, or certainly prior to making Louise Haigh the youngest cabinet minister, or certainly the youngest woman to join the cabinet ever. And yet he has accepted her resignation. The offence is, profoundly trivial in one way, and yet enough to secure a criminal conviction, albeit one that was met with the lowest possible outcome available, a discharge. It was sufficient to secure a conviction. I'm fascinated, as you know, by footballification, by the idea that we all suffer from an inability to view politicians objectively. I don't think it's true. I don't think that the rush to defend somebody who hails from the same side as the political divide as you do is anything like as strong across the spectrum as it is on certain parts of the political spectrum. I worry increasingly that we actually end up going too far the other way. If you've spent, for example, the last 14 years, the Vox Pops up in Sheffield that you heard during Thomas's news bulletin, I thought were fascinating. Because if you've spent the last 14 years calling out the conduct of Conservative politicians, Owen Paterson's breaches of standards that they greeted by trying to rip up the rule book, the unlawful prorogation of Parliament, lying to the Queen, Boris Johnson riding roughshod over the ministerial code and then lying about it repeatedly to the House of Commons, lying about everything repeatedly all the time. You've spent 14 years calling out the single worst, certainly since 2019, the single worst period of political misconduct in living memory. Matt Hancock with the COVID handling, the cronies receiving millions and millions and millions of pounds for equipment that wasn't fit for purpose, the hotlines that allowed friends of cabinet ministers to push straight to the front of the queue for lucrative business deals in sectors of business that they'd had no previous experience in whatsoever, the moral transgressions like Jacob Rees-Mogg dancing essentially on the graves of the Grenfell dead by accusing them of lacking common sense, and none of them ever really took responsibility for any of it. If you had to pick a watchword for the last 5 years of Tory government, certainly the bit that Boris Johnson presided over, then impunity, entitlement, and never explain, never apologise would be like tattoos across the foreheads of this shower. And then the basic incompetence, Nadine Dorries not knowing how Channel 4 was funded while giving evidence to a Common Select Committee on the funding of Channel 4, just to pick a couple of very light examples. And then Kemi Badenoch revealing that she'd committed quite a serious crime when she hacked into the computer of a political rival, but it hasn't prevented her from becoming leader of the Conservative Party any more than Ian Duncan Smith having lie after lie after lie on his CV. Not just using the word economist instead of the word banker, as Rachel Reeves stands accused of doing, didn't prevent him becoming leader of the Conservative Party either. So if you have, and of course, some of us, I don't want to make this sound silly, but some of us have done well out of telling the truth about the Tories when so much of the media was telling lies or inflating their nonsense or persuading you that Liz Truss was an economic genius, that Boris Johnson was an upstanding moral man, that the Brexit that people were encouraged to vote for would actually make them better off or be good for them. So all of the media complicit in inflicting these monstrous regimes upon the country have to kind of go after Labour politicians for tiny transgressions. Like, a bit like Keir Starmer's clothes. No rules were broken. All declarations were made, but it made news for day after day after day. And if you worry about footballification, you find yourself thinking, well, I better go in hard as well. So I don't want people to think that I'm biased. You better go in hard as well. But what you look at is not the colour of the shirt that the politician is wearing. You have to look at the action that has taken place. So this is the whole point about footballification. Grant Shapps had more names than... Well, he had several names, and he lied about it. I mean, every time you open this box of frogs, it's extraordinary how many jump out. And even those of us who chronicle it for a living have forgotten some of them. So there have been no lies told in this case. You have to look at the action on the pitch. Think about it. If you're a match of the day pundit, you have to leave your loyalties at the door. You can't be like a fan on in the stands, on the terraces. So when your centre-back ploughs through their centre-forward in an industrial fashion, running the risk of breaking both his ankles, you can't shout if you're a pundit. You can't. Well, I know you can, and they always do, but we can't start shouting, nothing to see there, ref, should have gone to spec. You've got to go, that was absolutely hideous. That was a horrible foul. You know? And similarly, if your striker goes down like a ton of bricks, having not been touched at all, you can't start shouting, penalty, penalty, penalty. It's impossible when you're watching football to do this. Even the man who invented the word footballification, me, when he goes to watch his football team, Kidderminster Harriers, finds it impossible not to join. You just shout, referee, you know somewhere inside, instinctively, not even intuitively, you've seen it evidentially. You're taking a bigger dive than Tom Daley, but you shout, penalty, referee, for goodness sake, I like to shout when I'm at the football. For goodness sake, bubbling goldfish ref. What on earth are you thinking? But politics is different. So, you know, here's a little example of what I'm talking about. What do you think Nigel Farage is being asked about in this interview? What question do you think this is a response to?
You can have your fun at Sky News. We've got 100,000 members. I've got 1 million followers on TikTok. Dame Andrew Jenkins has just joined us. She's our candidate for Greater Lincolnshire. You've had your fun. I'm off for lunch. Thank you.
I'm not going to do that as a hook and tease because it is characteristically disgusting. He's being asked about one of his own MPs who has been found to have kicked 7 bells out of a woman, being locked up for it and then lied about it. I'll play you that again with the question at the top.
It involves being honest, though. Are you not concerned that he lied about what he did?
Did he? He wasn't vetted. He wasn't vetted. James Murdoch was one of those many candidates who wasn't vetted at all with the party. Look, I didn't know any of this when I took back over as leader.
So you said you're going to put in place the most vigorous vetting system in place now. Do you think James Murdoch would not go through this new vetting system?
You can have your fun at Sky News. We've got 100,000 members. I've got 1 million followers on TikTok. Dame Andrea Jenkins has just joined us. She's our candidate for Greater Lincolnshire. You've had your fun. I'm off for lunch. Thank you.
So that's a British party leader being asked about a member of Parliament who kicked 7 bells out of an entirely innocent woman, got locked up for it, lied about it, and of course Farage has previously said that this conviction was known about before Murdoch became a parliamentarian. I'm just using it to highlight that if that was a Labour leader, if that was Keir Starmer, I would be absolutely disgusted and outraged. I mean, to the point of apoplexy, to the point of thinking he had to go. It's absurd for Kemi Badenoch to be calling for Keir Starmer's resignation at this point in the parliamentary cycle. But if Keir Starmer had been defending a man who had beaten up a woman, been locked up for it and then lied about it before sitting next to him in the House of Commons, then I would be beside myself with disgust. I'm fairly confident that is never going to happen. So this is what I mean by footballification. Imagine that was a Labour problem or a Liberal Democrat problem or even a Tory problem, but it's Farage. So it's almost expected, isn't it, that level of moral bankruptcy. But what if it was one of your lot that had done what Louise Haigh had done? And I'm going to tell you exactly what she did. There is a possibility, and this will be an answer to one of the questions that I'm going to ask you, that there may be more to come out. But I'm not so sure about that. So here's what happened. She got mugged horribly. She went to the police. She listed of what she believed had been taken during the mugging. This included her work mobile phone. Sometime later, she says, I discovered the mobile phone in question had not actually been taken. In the interim, I'd been issued with a new work phone. She turned on the original work device. This, in some ways, not to make light of the political issue here, or the moral issue, or the police issue. In some ways, the most shocking element of this whole story is that the police investigated a stolen mobile phone, because apparently when it got turned on as a stolen device, it triggered some sort of, and we are going back to 2014 on this, but it triggered some sort of reaction. The phone registered somewhere. A stolen phone has been turned on, so a light goes on in a police station somewhere. That's almost certainly not how it works, but it's a metaphor. And therefore, the police get in contact with her or with the phone. I don't know how. The original work device being switched on triggered police attention, and I was asked to come in for questioning. My solicitor advised me not to comment during that interview, and I regret following that advice. Perhaps as a consequence of the no comment, the police referred the matter to the CPS. I appeared before Southwark Magistrates Court under the advice of my solicitor. Again, I pleaded guilty, despite the fact that it was a genuine mistake from which I did not make any gain. The advice would have been, if you plead guilty, you'll get a discharge. This is not a big deal. Well, lawyers ring in and correct me, by the way. For goodness sake, don't take my word for it. But fairly clear that the solicitor was working on the principle that if you plead guilty, you'll get a discharge and you'll be home by tea time. If you plead not guilty, it goes to trial, and it becomes a much more complicated process. The magistrates accepted all of these arguments and gave me the lowest possible outcome available, a discharge. And there it is, as it stands. Keir Starmer knew about this when she was 24 years old when this happened, and has described the experience of being mugged in 2013 as terrifying. But what she should have done, and given that Aviva is an insurance company and she was working for Aviva at the time, it perhaps puts a slightly different complexion on things. What she should have done is declare when she found her old phone that she had found her old phone. We did this once with some jewellery, actually, that we thought had been stolen, and then we found it and we sent the money back to the insurer. That's what she should have done. I don't even know if she made an insurance claim. That's why I say there may be some more stuff to come out. So, the question becomes, it was before Southwark magistrates that this occurred. I don't know why Ian is quibbling about whether or not there is a Southwark magistrates court. I don't know. Maybe the word court. Anyway, I'm not sure that's the issue here. So, here's what I think. It's 18 minutes after 11. I've done this once this week where I carry my introduction on after the junction. But I wanted to set the stall out completely. I wanted to remind you about what morally bankrupt politics actually sounds like. I'll give you a clue. I'm off for lunch. And then I'm going to set it up even more, because this is really important, and then I'm going to take your calls. But if you know what your answer to the question of why do you think this has happened is, what do you think has happened here? Why has somebody gone for a historical spent offence that merited only a discharge and about which her boss, her party leader, already knew? Why do you think she has gone? And do you think it is good or bad that she has? And I will answer those questions first after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 11. All right, let's mix it up a bit. I tell you, we should have a little poster on the wall in here saying you don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps. Am I right? I'll take the calls before I tell you what my answer to the questions would be. But the questions, I think, would be, why has this happened? Why has a Secretary of State resigned over a complete nothing burger that her boss already knew about? And secondly, is it, however, the right thing to do? So I get a brief indication of what callers are likely to say, or at least what they've told the producer that they're going to say. And at the moment, the first two calls on the board are disagreeing with each other, but I agree with both of them, if that makes sense. At least I think I do. Let's start in Glasgow. Sarah is there. Why has this happened, and or do you welcome it, Sarah?
Hi there.
Hello.
Than's for having me on. We're a bit nervous, but
it's only me. It's only
you. I think it's a really good thing. My view is that we've had 14 years of just horrificness, and we've now drawn a line in the sand to say that that's not how we're going to move forward. And Louise has put her hand up. She's admitted to what's happened. They've obviously felt it's not appropriate for the new style government moving forward to have anything like that.
Then the immediate question becomes, then why did he give her the job in the first place if he knew about it?
Yeah, totally. But I think it's much better that she puts her hands up and says, I've done this, rather than partying. You know, we've had MPs that have partied during lockdown that we find out afterwards, and we almost became immune to the horrendousness that happened during that time. And it was, it's okay for the MPs to do that. And this is her as a victim, or she is paying the price for Tory misbehaviour, a Tory depravity, and Tory client journalism. And it's the Tory client journalists that have created the environment in which her situation could have become untenable or unbearable. So it's, I mean, it's grossly unfair that she's carrying the can for the last 14 years, because Keir Starmer has to portray his team as being whiter than white. And if there was a conversation about this, I suspect it would have been, this is never going to come out. And I mean, who cares? Honestly, it's a discharge anyway, and you were completely upfront about it all throughout. You've told me, but they probably never prepared for the fact, as they've clearly got wrong, Sarah. They clearly weren't prepared for how hostile the media was going to be when they got into power. They learnt that lesson with the suits and the spectacles. No rules broken, no laws broken, everything declared, nothing even vaguely below board. But goodness me, you'd think it was Watergate, judging by what some of the right-wing media did it. So they misjudged that, and that's part of the reason why they've responded to this in the way that they have. Absolutely. I think they were damned if they did, and they were damned if they didn't.
Do you think it will work? Do you think that actually seeking to portray... So I played the Farage clip earlier, because that won't lose him a single supporter. Behaving with such disgusting disdain for the plight of a young woman kicked viciously and violently by an MP in his own party and subsequently jailed for it, and then lied about it, and he starts making jokes about TikTok and his lunch. So he's no Farage fan is going to be impressed by the probity and integrity on display here, but we're fascinated permanently on this programme by the notion of the undecided voter. Do you think this may crystallise into actual reputation that the Labour Party and Keir Starmer can benefit from?
I hope so. because the Reform MP shouldn't be a member of Parliament.
Of course
and
not.
I think that more and more people, the sensible ones that I'm, being a woman, when I first read the story of this MP having done this, to the point where he was, it wasn't a first offence, they didn't say it's a first offence, you get off with it or anything. He went to jail. And it almost crystallises what reform are like. I mean, if you look at America, where they've put a convicted rapist back in the White House, the UK doesn't want to be that. And it gives us now the opportunity to say we want to distance ourselves. Now, if people want to vote reform, that's on their conscience. But the current government has to be seen to be a pillar of society and say that this doesn't need to be
which is why I've got it's not even cognitive dissonance. It does not merit a resignation, but it's right that she's resigned. It's such a weird position to be in. Gavin is in Carlisle. Gavin, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I'm disgusted at this, and I want to give the MP my full support. I really hope that she reconsiders her decision and goes back to work tomorrow.
So do I.
I know it sounds
but I agreed
ridiculous.
with that. Go on, carry on. You fill your boots.
I know it sounds ridiculous, like something she's not going to do. But please, Lisa, you were one of the best. Louise, yeah, you were one of the best cabinet MPs we've got right now, holding a major portfolio for transport, and we need you back. Get back to work and just ride this out. Look, I've been asked to run for office by two of your colleagues on LBC, and I've told them that I can't because I'm an ex-convict. Right?
Interesting.
That's the reality. I've been asked by something in the region of 500 ordinary people to run for office, and I've explained to them that I can't. I haven't went into detail with all of them, but we live in a society where certain types of people get off all the time. Your last caller says she doesn't want convicted rapists becoming politicians. Yeah,
well,
fair enough.
No. There's no convicted rapists in this conversation. I hear
well,
that.
But she was referring to Trump.
I see what you mean. Adjudicated, not convicted. It's an important distinction, especially on the programme that would. What in a sentence? Why do you think they've done this? Why do you think he's accepted her resignation?
Just because he knows he's going to get it in the neck off the right wing press.
But that makes it the right thing to do. It's so bizarre. It's a bit like saying to a kid who's being bullied, don't wear your Superman T-shirt tomorrow because they always kick your head in even harder when you wear your Superman T-shirt. And you should be saying you wear your Superman T-shirt with pride, but you don't because you don't want your lad to get his head kicked in. So you tell him to leave his Superman T-shirt at home. Do you see what I mean?
I see what you mean, but it doesn't work, James, and I've got experience of this. Appeasement does not work. If you hold yourself to this standard and allow yourself to be held to this standard, they're going to hit you for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
Well, then you make sure there isn't a next thing. Then you make sure that there isn't a next thing. It's coming up to 11:29. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and now we throw the phone lines open because, in a way, I agree with both callers, and that doesn't make sense, does it? I agree with Sarah that it's good that they have done this, and I agree with Gavin that it should not have happened. Can I just say riddle me that and go to the news? Or would that be, even by my standards, a little bit lazy? Don't say the name of the newsreader in my ear, Keith, when I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to just say riddle me that and go to the news. So I think that it is good that it has happened because of a dreadful word, optics. And it is bad that it has happened because it is not fair and should not have happened. I'm not going to say riddle me that. I am going to say riddle me that, but I'm going to reserve the right to explain a little further after the very latest headlines with Thomas Watt.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:32 is the time. Here is a missing word round that I think is brilliant. You probably know this because it's been in the news, but you may not. Starmer blames blank for migrant chaos. Do you need a clue? Starmer blames blank for migrant chaos. I've got another one for you as well before we go home, so don't let me forget. But that's the first one. It's another story that has perhaps been pushed off the front page by the Louise Haigh case or even by the continuing assisted dying debate, which is, of course, live as we speak in the House of Commons and will conclude, or at least the vote will occur at 2:30 today. So expect Sheila to be all over that story as well. Another story, briefly, that has been inevitably pushed off the front pages, that everybody, I think, today would be talking about if it were not for the Louise Haigh resignation, is the extraordinary comeback in the snooker last night in York at the UK Championship by Michael the Hitman Holt, who managed to squeeze past Jack Jones 6-5 after being 5-2 down at the point when I, having had a small flutter on this exchange, decided to go to bed. So you go to bed in a first to six battle when your man is 5-2 down, and you wake up to discover that he's somehow managed to get over the line 6-5. And so all power to Michael Holt, to the Hitman, as he makes his way into the last eight. It's just a great story all round, and he's such a lovely bloke that we wish him all the very, very, very best. Okay, so here's what I think has happened. I don't think there is more to come out. The definition of fraud by misrepresentation is not, as a couple of my texters are suggesting, the same as the definition of fraud, a fraud offence that would likely get you jailed. Reporting a phone as stolen and then failing to report that actually it hadn't been stolen after all, in the great scheme of things, is deeply trivial. And I'm afraid that's not debatable. You thought your phone had been stolen. You subsequently discovered it hadn't been. You didn't report it as stolen. So you've kept something that was no longer rightfully yours. But in the great scheme of things, and my legal advice is that she was appallingly advised by her solicitors to do a no comment at the first encounter. If you're a lawyer, then, or indeed a copper, then feel free to chip in from that position. But I'm interested inevitably in the politics of it. And the politics of it, I think, is this. Starmer is committed to the integrity, professionalism and accountability that Rishi Sunak claimed he was committed to. In fact, a couple of you have picked up on this parallel. I may read out your message shortly. I'll read it now. James, to take you back to what Rishi Sunak said on the day he was elected about bringing back integrity, etc., before immediately bringing back Suella Braverman. Fortunately, Starmer set his standard publicly, and not letting her resign would have put him closer to Sunak instead of diametrically opposed. I remember your monologue about the Rishi situation. I almost clapped in agreement, so I'm with you on this being an unfortunate but necessary situation. So this doesn't happen very often in politics, and certainly not when you're looking at the last 14 years in the rearview mirror, when the only thing really that united Conservative politicians by the end was an absolute refusal to take responsibility for their own actions, whether it was breaches of parliamentary standards, whether it was breaches of the most basic moral decencies, or whether it was simple competence. Never, ever, ever take responsibility for anything. So why on earth does a Secretary of State for Transport have to resign over an obvious triviality, a discharged conviction? There's no criminal record, when the Prime Minister who accepted her resignation already knew about it. Two questions. Number one, how could he have given her the job if he already knew about it and felt that it was a resignation issue? To which the answer is it just didn't cross their minds that it was going to be out or a story. And for evidence of that, to back up that theory, look at the suits, look at the clothes. Again, no rules broken, nothing that was kept secret from anybody, all out in the open. But they had a crash course in discovering how the media treats a Labour government as opposed to how the media treats a Labour opposition, when the successive Conservative governments are, even for the worst kind of client journalist Tory, they are close to unbearable, close to indefensible. So they've had a crash course. Often happens with new governments. After a long period in opposition, whether it's the Tories in 2010 or Labour in 97, it's a crash course in what it's actually like to be in power. So the conversation about, what does this matter? Do you think it prevents me from? No, of course it doesn't. No one's going to care. Turns out, of course, that they do care, or at least they pretend to care. They pretend to care enormously. The people that didn't care about all the things that Boris Johnson did, the people that didn't care about Grant Shapps having 307 different names, the people who didn't care about Kemi Badenoch boasting about breaking the law in the context of her dealings with another politician's website. They're the people who didn't care about Jacob Rees-Mogg lying to the Queen or Boris Johnson unlawfully proroguing Parliament. They pretend to care passionately about this story. And that segues, or that Suzanne Hall was telling Porkies about her own wallet, wasn't she, not long ago? But who cares about that? Nobody cares about that. A, because she's a ridiculous human being, and B, because she's a Tory. So she was the candidate for mayor for the Tories, for those of you lucky enough never to have heard of her. The point becomes that everyone will pretend to care, and the media crucible will get hotter and hotter. So that's 52% of the explanation. 48% of it is that Starmer really wants this to be a watchword for his government. He absolutely doesn't want any room whatsoever for anybody to be able to say you're as bad as the last lot. That's why they're so desperate. That's why they're pretending that the source of his suits is a matter of national import. That's why they're pretending that Rachel Reeves writing economist instead of banker, if that's the technicality you're obsessed with on her CV, is a story up there with Watergate. It's why that they're reduced to pretending that a bunch of weirdos signing a petition is somehow national news, or somehow something that the leader of the opposition can bring up in the House of Commons without looking like a complete flump. So Starmer wants to be squeaky clean. Squeaky clean. And I think their definition or their understanding of what squeaky clean actually means has changed. I think they didn't think squeaky clean had to be quite this squeaky before the suit stuff, before the Wahid Ali stuff. So now, here it is. What would Johnson do? He'd send out WhatsApp messages saying, let's form a square around the Haigster. Remember, like he did when Priti Patel was caught being out of order. Always with Johnson, yes, defend the wrongdoing, defend the wrongdoing, defend the wrongdoing. However big it is, Starmer, condemn the wrongdoing, punish the wrongdoing, however small it is. That's what's happened here. I would stake what's left of my reputation on there being no more details to come out. This has happened because Starmer wants squeaky clean, and because nobody wants another couple of weeks of right-wing client journalists who are silent about all the things that we've just been listing, pretending that this is a very big deal. Also, there is a line. Lawbreakers can't be lawmakers. Lawbreakers can't be lawmakers. Even if the discharge, even if the record is clear, she has no record, it's a spent conviction, then and no one has lied in public office. Let's make that absolutely clear as well. 11:41 is the time. Why has this happened? All right. 0345 6060973 is the number that you call. Why has this happened? Why has Keir Starmer accepted Louise Haigh's resignation? Okay. And here's the real killer question, whatever your answer to that is. Working on the principle that it is a pursuit of the squeaky clean, do you think it will work? Because here's where I part company with the obvious narrative. I'm not sure it will. I honestly don't know. You remember, and that's why it was right to raise that point about Rishi Sunak. You remember when we sat here saying, oh, thank goodness for that. I actually believe that Rishi Sunak is committed to the reintroduction of integrity, professionalism and accountability. This is what I mean about footballification. Rishi Sunak was Boris Johnson's Chancellor. I consider Boris Johnson to be the single worst thing that's happened to this country since the Second World War, politically. I genuinely. But it didn't matter because footballification, take your scarf off. Here's a new fella promising a new broom. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's believe him. Let's trust him when he says integrity, professionalism and accountability matter. And then he puts Suella Braverman back in the Home Office and all of your dreams disappear in a matter of minutes, right? So set aside footballification. Forget about it. If a Prime Minister seeks to be squeaky clean against the backdrop of the last 14 years, we should all welcome it. Unless, of course, and Donald Trump teaches us there are loads of people out there who love the depravity, who love the dishonesty, who love the moral corruption. But for those of us who don't, for those of us who either despise it or feel ambivalent about it, the obvious need of a government, a prime minister, a political establishment that is committed to integrity, professionalism and accountability becomes clear. So is it going to work? Is Keir Starmer's acceptance of Louise Haigh's resignation going to help establish a perception of integrity, professionalism and accountability? That's the bit of the question I can't answer. And I don't know who can. Because for me, it's clear that that's why he's accepted her resignation. He's accepted her resignation because we can't have the tiniest fly in the ointment of our government. When we became the government, when I appointed Louise Haigh, I thought we could have some tiny little flies. I didn't think anyone would notice flies as small as this. But what they've learned from the reaction to the football tickets and the suits, what they've learned is that it doesn't matter how tiny or how trivial the fly is. If it's in the ointment, they will get their microscopes out. They've got their client journalists in the newspapers. They've got their friends on in the broadcast media. They will pretend that these tiny, tiny little flies are enormous. That's 50% of it. But the other 50% is we actually really do need to be squeaky clean. I don't know. I honestly don't know whether or not this will work, which is why I'm asking you. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So you know that we were being honest when we said integrity, professionalism and accountability should be welcomed by everybody, even if you're a fully paid up member of the Labour Party. So we hoped for an hour or two that Sunak was going to bring them in. This, in a way, is Starmer showing how committed he is to integrity, professionalism and accountability. Is it going to matter? Is it going to make the tiniest bit of difference to anybody? It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:47 is the time. Elaine says, after listening carefully to LBC all morning, I think her resignation should not have been accepted. In the great scale of things, it really wasn't so bad. I'm not sure that's the point, Elaine. Suzanne's in Cork. Suzanne, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hi. Yeah, I'm just listening and thinking, do you know, I think this is going to come back to bite them, to bite Keir Starmer, because I think whilst it's very, taking the moral high ground and also, saying, look, we have to be squeaky clean and we're going to set the bar. I think that's a good thing. But I just fear now that every single little thing, on lots and lots of different people, either in his cabinet or in the government, are going to come up one after the next, after the next, after the next. And then, is he going to have to accept resignations from everybody?
That's the problem, isn't it?
Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes,
there's
no,
so
I do.
many small
I do.
things.
Well, but if we were to confine it to convictions, then he's probably all right. And that's why I keep talking about the suits, where no laws, no rules, nothing was broken, and yet it was treated like Watergate. So if it is just convictions, then what would you have? I don't know what I'd have to do. I'd have to say I was done for shoplifting in 1988 and cannabis possession in 1990. Does that prevent me from being Secretary of State for Transport?
Yeah. So I do agree. I think maybe something needs to be looked at to be actually set down in stone on this and clearly defined, as in, it has to be a conviction, it has to be this, it has to be that, and then you can't even be accepted as having a ministerial position. Or
do you think it butters any parsnips for the electorate at large? Because I don't know why I'm thinking constantly about that weird afternoon a couple of years ago when I thought Rishi Sunak was actually going to turn the corner on the awfulness of Johnson. I'd still be opposed to his politics, but the lying wasn't going to become commonplace. The impunity wasn't going to be afforded to everybody. The really awful people were not going to be promoted into big positions. And then he put Braverman back in the Home Office. Do you think Starmer can create an air of better by doing things like this, or not?
Unfortunately, I don't think he can.
I don't know if he can either. Why did I think Sunak could, but I don't think Starmer can? That's just weird, isn't it?
I just think it's gone too far, and I think too many people are tired of it, have had enough, and just accept, well, look, it happened, let's just move on. And, it's like, I do think that now Starmer needs to be, I say stronger, and just state the position more clearly. this lady is doing an amazing job. She's very competent. Da-di-da. This happened back in, when was it? Was it 2015?
2013, she was mugged. 2014, she was caught, as it were.
I mean, she was mugged. I mean, that must have been horrendous. And, you know, these things...
How many people would? I'm just an interesting question. How many people, if they, in good faith, reported their work mobile phone as having been stolen and then subsequently realised that they hadn't had it with them that night after all, how many people would then own up, if that's the right word to use? How many people would bring in the go and tell the truth?
I don't know. I can't imagine. Mate, I don't know. Is it really that big a?
Well, I mean, it clearly isn't. It's not even. You don't even. Because what you do is imagine if it was a politician you don't like. So imagine if Nigel Farage or I don't know, Mark Francois had been caught in this case precisely. Would you be sitting here on the radio calling for their resignation and expressing the view that it's proof that they're completely corrupt or wrong no, of course, nobody would. Literally nobody would. Here's an example. Steve writes, tiny fly, fraud is not a damn fly, it's a damn monster. Starmer needs to check his inadequate ex-minister sooner. Your flies are wide open on this one. So I got mugged. I reported my phone as stolen. Found it a bit later at home, turned it on, got collared. And that's a monster. That's a damn monster, says Steve in Surrey Hills. That's the kind of attitude that makes me think Starmer's wasting his time. But I suppose in the last hour we were focusing on open minds, people who were capable of thinking about things rather than just checking the colour of the scarf around their neck and responding accordingly. Does Starmer's attempt to be squeaky clean, does it look doomed to you, or could it work? 0345 6060973. Keir Starmer has announced her replacement as Transport Secretary. It will be Heidi Alexander, has now been made Secretary of State for Transport. 11:52 is the time. Andy is in Donaghadee in Northern Ireland. That's 2 calls from Ireland, from the island of Ireland. What would you like to say, Andy?
Hello, I'm in the north. Morning.
Hello.
Right. Okay, I think this all started going wrong back in 2014. I'm a retired police officer for 34 years.
Yeah.
And it used to really bug me when these solicitors used to come in and tell their clients to go no comment when clearly the people were innocent. And they'd go no comment, and I'd think to myself, why do you not just tell the truth? Because I'm sure if she'd have told the truth at the time, I don't think the police would have gone anywhere near that. It was just a mistake, and that's the end of it.
Well, it's a little bit more than a mistake. Steve in Surrey Hills thinks it's a damn monster. But the idea why 2014? What happened in 2014 that made no comment a more popular response in these kind of interviews?
Well, I think to be honest, most of my life in the police service, you get these, and I'm sorry, lazy solicitors, and mainly the duty ones, that come along, you give them your disclosure, and then they go away, and then you go for interview, and these people just no comment, even for names and things like that. and some of these people, you think you clearly do have a story to tell here, but they're taking the advice of a solicitor, which is fair enough. And as a police officer, or
I think you're right. And she says she regrets taking that advice, because if she'd said, "I'm really sorry, I've never been in trouble before, I'd reported it stolen, I honestly believed it had been. You've got the police record in front of you of the mugging, and then I found it at home and I've turned it on, and I should have brought it straight to the police station, or I should have taken it back or I should have done so." I find it, and you're the ex-copper, but I find it almost impossible to believe for a nanosecond that anybody would have said, "Right, we'll see you in court, lady."
I'll tell you what, if that was me and she'd have said that to me, but back then, I would have said no. Okay.
So why does and so the no comment is almost like a provocation to the police in this kind of case?
Oh, it is. I mean, you got to listen to the actual caution when they say, if you fail to mention when questioned something you later rely on in court. That's the thing.
Yes.
And yes, there are a lot of people that you know.
So why would a solicitor? I mean, maybe we need to speak to. Why would a solicitor tell? They got the evidence. They've seen that the phone has been turned on.
Exactly, because some of them are very lazy, and some of them actually are not solicitors. They're just runners. Paralegals that, earn their £200 for turning up.
So they're protecting themselves from getting something wrong by telling their client to say no comment. Stephen in Milton Keynes says, yes. I was told to give a no comment at an interview a few years ago when it was a case of mistaken identity. I hugely regret not clearing things up quickly. It's like we think, well, the lawyer must know what they're talking about. I've never been in a police station before.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you think, how old was she? 24? 24, yeah. But I don't know, but I imagine never been in a police station before to be answering questions. She must have been terrified.
I suppose if there's anything else to come out, it would involve an insurance claim, wouldn't it? But it was her work phone, so there wouldn't have been an insurance claim either, would there? You can't make an insurance claim on your work phone.
Right, but exactly. But if she'd have lost the phone in 2013 and it came about in 2014, you got a year there that she didn't make an insurance claim, even though it wouldn't have gone anywhere.
Beg the question of where the heck the phone was. I suppose it could have been down the back of the sofa. That happened to me once with a laptop. Well, what's the operational reality here? What happens? A phone is registered as stolen. You turn it on, and the police know. How does that bit work?
Well, do you know what? I heard that and I thought, I don't know how that works.
Well, you're no use, are you?
Yeah.
That's the bit, because that's what all the jokers are saying. The most shocking element of this story is that the police investigated a missing mobile phone, and that's another thing that adds to the possibility that there is more on the way, that there is more to come out. But no, there it is. There's so many more questions than answers involved in this, but it's Occam's razor. The only reason I can see why Starmer would accept her resignation and say, don't be ridiculous, this is nothing, is because the need to be seen to be whiter than white, purer than pure, cleaner than clean, squeakier than squeak, has arguably overridden common sense. And yet I still think it's probably the right idea. Luke's also in Stoke-on-Trent. What would you like to say, Luke?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
you all right?
Yeah, very well. What have you got?
Right, I think this is a massive storm in the teacup like everybody else. It's definitely...
No, not everybody else. Steve in Surrey Hills thinks it's an enormous monster, a damn monster.
Oh, well, it's a very tiny monster in my pocket, so I'm not really that worried about it. No, but yes, so seriously, I can imagine a scenario where she might, let's say, the night before, knock the phone off the bedside table, it's gone behind the bed or down the sofa or what have you, run a rush to work, gotten mugged, she's stressed, she's reported it stolen because she can't find it, so she assumes she's obviously in trying to be responsible to her employer, say that the phone is no longer with me, I don't know where it is, and therefore it's stolen. Like you say, then matters take their course with the police to obviously put I think a trace on it, because I believe, like you say, things like serial numbers and everything like that will have been logged.
Maybe they were trying to reset it, maybe. I don't know. Once a reported stolen with a crime number, then the phone maker pings the police or something like that. It's not mystery hour, but I'm fascinated by this element of the story.
Like I say, I don't know all the details of how this would work, but like you say, I am certain that working in accounts, the phone would have an asset number and have all the serial numbers and all of that registered, and in the event of it being stolen, that information would be handed by the business to the police so they could help trace it. As soon as it gets found and it pings off the local network towers, so there'll be a triangulated position of where it was switched on, then obviously the police will be able to say, right, there it is, go find it.
And it was in her house.
And so obviously, technically, for whatever reason, I don't understand why this is a crime, but obviously she's reported something that's been perhaps then construed as a waste of police time, which she's then had to plead guilty to. And so, like you say, ultimately, when you take this 10 years later, this is now being raked over in the press as, oh, right, well, she's guilty of something. She should have gone to jail.
She must go. So should Starmer have accepted her resignation? I mean, should they have styled it out? Because if they'd styled it out...
this is not. This is where I really take issue with the idea. Definitely not styling it out. I would have said that it's 10 years since the events which have occurred, which... in a business setting, 7 years' worth of accounts is worth writing off any previous taxes. So spent convictions, certainly would, I presume, it be equivalent. But more importantly, she hasn't actually done anything wrong. She's pleaded guilty on the basis of getting the least punitive sentence of the justice system, because the justice system rewards people who come forward and admit guilt. Now, I can imagine that, like you said, you've had the issues of people saying, why had my lawyer done that? To advise no comment or to...
I'm getting a lot of support for that position coming in.
But I would refer you to an American judge that's really good called Judge Fleischer, and he looks at all people with drinking and driving offences and all of that, and takes a dim view of all of people doing misbehaviour under that purview. But coming back to the point, the thing is that she has pleaded guilty, not because she's committed a crime, but because
she has committed a fraud by misrepresentation. But it is, I mean, it's extraordinary to think that the police bothered with this until you read the bit about her saying no comment. I don't know. I'm finished with this conversation, actually, Luke. It's 1 minute after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, get curiouser and curiouser, said Alice.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I could carry on talking about elements of the Louise Haigh story forever, but I think if there is anything else to come out, then that will give us an opportunity to return to that territory. Just the simple operational reality of how it happened. I don't know. So I may, if someone genius rings in, I may return to that in the course of the next hour. But we need to keep an eye on events in the House of Commons. We'll catch up with Natasha shortly on the question of what the debate has been like. And it's Friday, and normally for the final hour that we get to spend together, of course not including Full Disclosure, which is a particularly powerful episode this week, about which I'll tell you a little more shortly. We tried to do something a little more light-hearted. I think this counts as light-hearted. So, and also, I've developed a habit lately, I don't know if you've noticed, of trying to link things together that aren't necessarily obviously linkable. So yesterday we were talking about technology. We probably dropped the ball a bit by not realising that the legislation in Australia designed to ban access to social media for anybody in Australia under the age of 16 was about to become law. But we had the conversation about the plausibility, the feasibility of that, and we will find out. We can watch, because I'll tell you something for nothing. If it works in Australia in any measurable way, and it's never going to be 100%, is it? But you don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If it achieves what it is designed to achieve in Australia, then other countries will be following at a rate of knots. But I explained a bit about why I find these conversations so fascinating, and it's largely because of the way that they change in front of you. You know, so many conversations that lend themselves to traditional radio phone-ins don't change at all unless you ask the question in a slightly different way. So stop and search, you know, a long queue of elderly white men who've never been stopped and searched in their lives, ringing LBC to tell another elderly white man how adamant they are that it's absolutely right that the police should discriminate against young black men and treat them as guilty until they prove themselves innocent, is one of the most reliable, hackneyed and well-versed tropes in the history of phone-in radio. And I'm afraid I went down that road when I started doing this job. But confine the conversation exclusively to people who are personally and directly affected by it, and you have a completely different experience. So some topics, traditional conversations that we have together, the ball never moves. It'll sound the same in 2024 as it would have done in 2004 unless you ask the question differently. So the reason why I love technology questions is because the ball moves all the time. So here's an interesting thing. When I started doing this job, I knew people who would get married without revealing that they had met on a dating app. I'm just waiting for the jaws of my younger colleagues to be picked up from the floor. There was a stigma attached to having met on a dating app. I can't even remember what they were called back in the day, but this is long before things like Tinder and Bumble saw the light of day. I have been at weddings where I knew that the couple had met on a dating app, but their own parents didn't. They just said they'd met at a party, or they'd met. They knew they hadn't met at work because they knew what jobs they do. It's a very easy little fib to spread, and it's a very easy little fib to be complicit in. But there was a little stigma. Well, clearly enough stigma for for a myth to be. But because I think the idea was, back in the day, that it was an admission of defeat if you signed on to a dating app because you'd failed to attract a mate in the wild. Do you think that's what it was? I think it was. You're going on a dating app. Well, what's wrong with you? Can't you pull? Does no one ever want to go out with you? Do you never get asked out? Do you never? So there was an admission of defeat by signing up to a dating app, and the defeat was that you'd proved unable to attract a mate in the wild. And things have now gone full circle to the point where I think I was sat with some younger colleagues a couple of years ago, and all of the ones that were in relationships had met their boyfriends or girlfriends on dating apps, and there could not have been less stigma. It had been completely stripped, if you like, of stigma. Which brings us to news this week that they are all, Tinder, Hinge, Bumble, Grindr, dipping in popularity. The numbers haven't gone off a cliff, but the constant growth, if you like, has finished. This is something else that's overseen by Ofcom. God, they work hard at Ofcom, don't they? They really are wonderful people over there. I salute their indefatigability. I really do, and their commitment to the cause. So the top 4 have gone down. Tinder has lost 600,000 people, 600,000 users. For younger people in particular, it seems that the novelty of dating apps is wearing off. 10 minutes after 12 is the time. I would like to know why. I'd also like to know how familiar or how the reports from a Times writer today sound to you, particularly for women, that these apps have always been awful. A writer called Charlie Gowans-Eglinton writes about how she's done countless articles over the last 10 years on every novelty and nuance of dating apps, but has never actually written about how awful they are, how they do not deliver the promised joy. So, I mean, somewhere between these two things must lie the truth. What is the reality of a dating app? The idea being portrayed in this article is that men lie constantly. See, if you meet I met a young fellow earlier who's here on a sort of form of work experience, and he was speed dating last week, and he said, I couldn't believe how many women turned up. And I thought, well, do you know what? I can. Because if you go to a speed dating event as a woman, the man can't lie. He can lie about whether he's married or not, but he can't lie about his age. So the turning up for the date to discover that the person that you've arranged to have a date with bears precious little resemblance to the profile of the person that you've arranged to have a date with seems to be a large part of the problem for the women written about in this article in the Times today. So what I would like to know, I mean, could they be creating their own extinction? If you were a really successful dating app and everyone on it got married, no, you'd still have the new generation joining. So I want to know what your reality was. That's all. Because I'm of this age and I've been married for so long that I've now seen the dating app go from stigma to commonplace. And now it seems to be moving away again. Not necessarily back into the space of stigma, but the warning from some analysts is that there's something a little bit uncool about them. The novelty of dating apps is wearing off, Ofcom said in its annual Online Nation report. One of the researchers at the University of Leeds who works in this field says there is a growing romanticisation of in-person meeting and interaction. Is this what meet cute means, Keith? Do we know what meet cute means? Is that the opposite of meeting online? Is meet cute meeting online? Well, how can you not know? You're only about 24. I'm obviously not talking to Keith now. What does meet cute mean? And is that part of the reason why the apps appear to be dipping in popularity? People on social media talk about romance as if actually meeting in person is preferable to meeting online. There are also, Franz tells me, a lot of scams. At the beginning, you could genuinely meet somebody legit, but it became a cesspit. I almost gave up internet dating due to the amount of scams that I came across. And then I tried a site that you have to pay to be on, and I met the woman who became my wife within a few weeks. So what has happened I didn't forget Grindr. I mentioned Grindr. Grindr's gone down in popularity as well. But the reason Alan writes is that it was huge. It's lost support because so much emphasis is based on good looks and not substance. These apps can be incredibly damaging. Instead, a lot of gay men are now meeting through social and sporting groups. So I don't know that there's a particularly complicated question to ask here. I'm struck by the generational change. But why did you go off them? Why have you gone off them? Match.com it was called, wasn't it? The one back in the day that people were a bit embarrassed to admit they'd met through. So why have you gone off these apps? Well, I'll use your experience, your example, as a way of understanding the bigger question of why they're dipping in popularity. So come at it from either angle. Why do you think this is happening? So Alan's got personal experience of it, although not as a potential dater. But and I'm not more interested in the experience of women on this, because if something dips in popularity by these sort of numbers, it's going to be across the whole range of previous members. But I mean, I do think that women probably have worse experiences than men. Take that as a challenge, chaps, for once. I'm not excluding you from the conversation. I'm just speculating that women probably have worse experiences than men on this. Why have you gone off dating apps? Because for a while there was a kind of almost a sort of mythical sense that everyone could find love on one of these things, and that this great new world of dating and romance had opened up for generations of people. What is your experience? What is your reality? Why have you gone off them? What was the worst experience that you had in the context of the contents of the box bearing no resemblance whatsoever to the picture on the front, like the Brexit of dating, if you like? 0345 6060 973. And why do you think they are diminishing in popularity? I don't know if I've got enough Generation Z listeners to address the question of whether or not you are actually now increasingly favouring the face-to-face meeting, the personal interaction. But if I do, is it true? Do you, as a member of Generation Z, find the idea of online dating, finding a partner on the internet, less attractive than finding a partner in person? It's 12:15. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 minutes after 12. One of the great phenomena of the last few years, the last 2 decades, I would say, the dating app is declining in popularity for the first time ever. I wonder if you know why, either from an overview or from your personal experience. If you think you do, you know the number, 0345 6060 973. A quick word on Meet Cute, which I'm delighted to report I wasn't the only person who was a little bit ignorant of. It's a movie device, Dougie explains, where the two characters, usually the romantic leads, are introduced to each other. So one character spills a coffee on another, or one stops another from accidentally stepping off a curb into the path of oncoming traffic. So it's a meet cute. Why you have to use language in this way, I'll never know. It's a cute meeting, isn't it? It's a cute meeting. But such is the nature of modern parlance that you have to call it a meet cute. So for Generation Z, the idea is it's not meet cute, is it? It's not very cute to have met your partner online. I want to meet someone who puts their jacket over a puddle so that I don't get my shoes dirty, or someone who rescues me from falling under a passing tube train. These are slightly extreme examples, but okay, so there it is. That might be part of it. We'll find out. Lucas is in Brighton. Lucas, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi. So, I met my partner online on Instagram rather than a dating app.
How does that work? I'm going to sound so old, aren't I, during this whole conversation? No, I've heard of this before. So you establish some form of common interest, and then one of you asks the other one out.
That's it, exactly. But we kind of really wanted to focus on traditional dating. So, like, going out and meeting up rather than being online all the time. There's just no trust in online dating, I don't think.
Why not?
I've never trusted them. Because everyone just wants sex, right?
Yes.
Basically, it's just
even the women. I mean, I don't mean that in a silly way, but the traditional trope when dating was done in bars and what have you, the men would be portrayed as being on the lookout for sex, while the women were on the lookout for love. I never know how fair that was, but is that what you're saying happened online, or was it a little bit more democratic?
I think there is a bit of a gender thing to it.
Sure.
I mean, I'd say that my female friends that use online dating apps, for example, they are focused on finding a genuine match, but they can never do it.
Because the man is focusing on finding a partner for the night.
Exactly, that's it. Yeah, even if they say that's not the case.
That's really it. So what has happened, and I should have seen this coming, is that the world of dating online has kind of just ended up being exactly like the world of dating offline.
Well, yeah, it's a bit of a cesspit, to be honest. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's not great. It's not great, but...
So among your peer groups, how common is your experience? And I mean, this is why I thought I was going to sound old, Lucas, because I would have thought that however you meet, whether it's online or offline, there's nothing novel or original about then deciding that you'd like to spend more time in each other's actual company than just swapping messages and swapping
no, exactly.
things online.
I think personally that, you know, we focus on differences between generations, but I think there's a lot of similarities that maybe people don't like to focus on. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, it puts me out of business in a way because I'm a great one for trying to chronicle social change. But that bit that you just said then about the reason why it's happening, that begs the question of why it's taken 20 years to happen. I mean, I don't know why you. But has it got worse in recent years? And that would probably be best answered from a female point of view. And I think it's fair to make that gender distinction, just historically, that men are more interested sometimes in a one-night stand than women are, and women are often more interested in long-term relationships than men are. But you're more than welcome to challenge that if you want. Seb's also in Brighton. Crikey, this is all happening in Brighton today. Seb, what would you like to say?
Hi there.
Hello.
Just for a bit of context, I am 21 years old and I'm single, and I've only really ever had one relationship, and that was about 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
And I have, and I'm quite an independent person, but I would like to be in another relationship. And
yes.
Just for the record, I would say I have more friends that are women than I do men, and I also only live with women, so I get on with people very easily, but I find it really difficult to meet people in person and be flirtatious. And I've complained to my friends because I don't drink, so it does hinder me a bit socially.
Yes.
And I say, how do I meet people? And they say, oh well, get on Hinge, get a dating app. And so a couple of weeks ago, I downloaded Hinge in order to meet people, and what I noticed straight away is that you're given a certain number of free likes to try and meet other people, but then after that, you then have to pay for the service, and immediately I felt like I was a product on display, like a commodity in some respects, and I was judging other people who were equally put in this kind of feeling of made to be vulnerable, and I was judging them through really harsh standards of beauty, which I felt like I caught myself doing. I thought, this is actually incredibly unfair to someone else who is also in my position.
Wow.
And I was in this cycle for a few weeks, and I thought I have to stop this because it's putting me, I'm placing myself on a pedestal, and I'm being incredibly unfair. And I've always preferred to want to meet people in person, and I think that's what I'm going to try and continue doing. And I've just kind of quit the app already.
Crikey! What a lovely way of explaining it. So, because it was cutting both ways, you were commoditising yourself, and you realised that because the process of looking for a date began to feel a bit like shopping.
Exact. Shopping is the perfect way of putting it. And when I was advertising myself, I was trying to think of all the funniest prompts I could put on my profile,
yes,
and all the nicest pictures of myself, which may not even represent my true personality deep down, but lighting was good, and that's all that really mattered. It was a really unfortunate thing.
How amazing that you arrived at that conclusion without going on any dates, because I think for a lot of people it would normally take a few dates before you began to realise that this was all quite artificial. But that's a sort of intellectual process that you've embarked upon that is quite quick, quite accelerated.
It was on my mind for quite a while, and I couldn't ignore that reality. So I couldn't lie to myself any longer. It wasn't making me feel good about things.
Beautifully put, and it is supposed to make you feel good about things, isn't it? That's the whole nature of it. Why? I mean, while you're here, and at risk of sounding like some creepy old uncle, why, when you've got so many women in your life who will have friends and they'll be bringing people to the house, and why? I mean, is it that gear change from small talk to flirtation that you struggle with?
Well, that's it. I've always found I've just been able to talk to women so much better. I'm much more relaxed with men. I don't feel masculine enough, and so I've always been able to talk and just get on with people. But then I see lots of my friends who are also women and they're in relationships, and I think, God, I wish I kind of, was in that same boat, and it's just, so I've never been confident enough to lose the inhibition and just
Which is why you mention alcohol.
flirting.
Which is one of the great inhibition releases. Well, Rick's listening to what you said. He said, this guy has figured out in 5 minutes what it took me 5 years to figure out on the online dating scene 10 years ago, which is kind of a piece with what I was trying to say. I mean, I hesitate to give you any advice, but I was speaking to a lad in his 20s literally 2.5 hours ago, and he'd just been speed dating. So that must now be a thing again for 20-somethings. That might be a better way, because then at least you get away from the are we, aren't we element of the exchange. Are we ready to escalate? Is this person... Because you kind of, at least you have your cards on the table. But would that feel weird?
I think better to do that than doing something behind a screen, because in person, it will always be much more valuable. So I guess, I could see myself doing that. And ironically, I was watching About Time, where there is a speed dating, like blind dating in that film. And that is the film which prompted me that night down Hinge to begin with. So maybe I would try something like that.
How funny. Well, I wish you the very best. I really do. It's a Bill Nye film, isn't it? Or at least Bill Nye plays the dad. Thank you, Seb. Who'd have thought that I was going to get calls mostly from men on this, and also mostly from men in their 20s in Brighton? So that is niche. That is bespoke demographic radio. I need some female voices as well, though, please. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I'm going to read this out, Mark, because I liked it. I've got no idea what it's got to do with anything, but all human life is here. One of my daughters met her husband in the Gulf War, James. They were both in the military, and another met hers on a building site. They were both construction workers. That's meat. Is that meat cute? That's meat cute, right? James is a war zone can be meat cute. We might have sort of, I don't know, pushed her out of the way of a bullet or something. That's about as cute as you can meet. Or James is pretending to have misheard. He thinks I'm talking about a meat queue. And he's now saying that he's only ever encountered one of those outside a butcher's shop at Christmas. But everyone's a joker, aren't they? 27 after 12 is the time. James is in Esher. Thank God you're not in Brighton. James, what would you like to say?
Hey, James, male 30 from Esher, so, I'm close. But, yes. Your previous caller summed up a lot of what I was going to say. I think it's a sort of a point of abundance. There's too much abundance in our generation, in our life at the moment.
Yes.
There's paywalls that they put in place, and the gamification element of these apps has become crazy. So you can effectively skew your algorithm to meet certain criteria of people. I remember meeting with my friends, for example, peers, recently even, and they're playing games to beat the algorithm to get served certain type of, opposite sex or whoever they're attracted to. And I think it's like most things that happen, it's like a slippery slope fallacy. The app started in the right place. They realize they're popular, they gain momentum, and then it just all falls apart, and we end up in this kind of situation.
Quite possibly. But the investment funds move in. I don't know, and I don't want to mention any by name, but one imagines that once they start making a significant amount of money, they become attractive to investors. And once investors move in, they're looking at ways of maximising the returns, which is not necessarily in the best interest of the people that are using the app.
Of course, and it never goes backwards. Like technology, it never goes backwards. So it will be there. The paywalls are in place. Now you have to pay, your previous caller to see more people, pay here. Oh, you want to see people, in another country, pay here, and then all of a sudden.
So what do you do? What's your? How are you? Are you, if you are looking for a relationship, what do you do? Where do you look as a 30-year-old single man in Esher?
I mean, there's this. I feel like this problem goes. You can zoom so far out because COVID happened. Now people aren't as social. People aren't going to clubs anymore. The culture of drinking changed. So meeting people has just become a different landscape. And thankfully I consider myself quite a social person.
Sure.
I'm usually happy to go out to meet people, so I don't stress myself too much about it. But I feel for the people that were on those apps, like you said, with the myth of I'm going to find love on these apps, and I genuinely believe that they could and maybe still can. I don't know, but there's a lot of blockers in place now where the 1% effectively rule the apps.
Right? Yeah.
Models that are on there, are they real? Are they fake? We don't know. Are they boosting their social presence?
And it doesn't matter for the people running the app whether it's real or not, because it's no longer dedicated to trying to put people together. It's dedicated to trying to make money. And of course you can do both. One quick question then. Where does the sort of Andrew Tate view fit into this conversation, if it does at all? Because
I don't know.
Old gits like me are kind of thinking, I've just spoken to 3 lovely sounding sensitive young men in a row, but I open my newspaper and your generation is supposed to be all about exploitation and misogyny and worshipping potential sex offenders.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully I'm not involved in any of those circles.
I didn't think you would
be. I obviously see the screenshots and the things that women post online saying, you know, their experiences on dating apps. So I'm excited to hear some of them call up as well. But I just thought,
yeah, me too. And that's what. But that will be where some of the gaming comes from at its most toxic extreme. It will be, this is how. It's like those books that used to be published about negging and treating women really badly and making. There was never any romance involved in that. It was all about the pursuit of instant and brief gratification involving deception. So phone lines are full, but I don't know how many women are waiting. Maybe that this is a conversation that unexpectedly skews massively towards men. Or it may be just another one of those phone-in topics that gets overtaken before any women have managed to get to the phone. It's 12:30. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 33 minutes after 12. Some very, very important breaking news for you. The Chinese-born entrepreneur who last week spent $6.2 million on a banana has eaten it. Here's Natasha Clark with the latest.
James, that was really unfair. I don't even know what you're talking about.
Natasha Clark has, by contrast, not been following the big news of the day. She's instead been keeping an eye on the assisted dying bill debate, which has been unfolding in the House of Commons since 9:30 this morning and will not conclude until 2:30. So I thought that a précis would be helpful.
We do need to keep lifting the nation's spirits through what is obviously quite a difficult day. But look, James, a really powerful couple of hours that I've just been watching in the House of Commons, and it's absolutely packed today. It's a Friday, so usually MPs slop off to their constituency to have other meetings and to basically leave the Commons behind them for the week. But today, absolutely rammed to the rafters, was 170 MPs tried to have their say today. They're debating it for the first time in nearly a decade. It's been pretty respectful so far, I'd say, quite moving, and in times incredibly graphic when talking about some really disturbing stories.
There's a couple
about how
I've
people
seen
are dying.
while I've been on air that I wouldn't expect you to share on the radio at this time of day. So anyone wading into that territory, be prepared for some truly hideous examples of what happens when when assisted dying is denied to profoundly ill people.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what some of the cases from people have been, exactly why we should be considering assisted dying, because the argument from these MPs is that it has to be better than the horrific situation that so many people in this country are left to die in at the moment. But yes, it's been one of the most compelling, I think, difficult, thoughtful debates that I've ever seen take place in the House of Commons in my time. And no matter what you think of MPs, James, and obviously Westminster Parliament, this is showing them at their really very best. All of these speeches have been really considered. It's clear that MPs, no matter which way they come down to vote, has really thought carefully, have listened to constituents, have listened to experts about the best way forward, and some of them really, of course, falling down on one side or the other. There are a lot of MPs that you won't be hearing from today who won't be sharing what they think, because they will be so torn. And I think some MPs, including people I was speaking to this week, not sure which way they're going to be voting when they go into the lobby later today. But yes, I think it just goes to show for me how the law at the moment just isn't working for so many people, how people are taking their own lives right now, alone, in pain, suffering, and it's just leading to some really, really awful situations. And the Labour MP, Kim Leadbeater, she's the one who's pushing this bill through. She kicked off the debate today by talking about some very powerful stories about the people who just wanted the choice to end their own lives.
Rebecca's mum, Fiona, developed metastatic brain cancer at the age of 69. She had very good palliative care, but her pain could not be managed and she died begging and screaming for assistance to end her suffering. Her family and the medical team treating her cried beside her bedside as it took her 10 days to die. Lucy's husband, Tom, was 47, a music teacher with a young son. He had bile duct cancer, which obstructed his bowel, resulting in an agonising death. He was vomiting so violently that he could not be sedated and was conscious throughout. Lucy pleaded with the doctors to help. The doctor treating him said there was nothing he could do. His family say the look of horror on his face as he died will never leave them. Former police officer James waved his mum off as she embarked on her final trip to Dignitas. She had terminal vasculitis. James desperately wanted to accompany his mum and hold her hands during her final moments. But he knew, because of his job as a police officer, it was just not possible. Indeed, she insisted he must not go with her. So she went alone. No one to hold her hand, no proper goodbye or funeral.
just a flavour of some of those heartbreaking stories from some of those people making a really, really powerful case for change today. And if this bill falls, some people in favour say this is going to be the end of that conversation for another decade. And that, I think, is the choice really weighing on MPs today. However, on the other hand, there have been some who are really compelling stories against this. This is Labour's Rachel Maskell talking about a story of a constituent who received a terminal diagnosis. They would have qualified for assisted dying, but then they recovered.
My constituent was just 46 when she received the terminal diagnosis. She didn't have long. The cancer was advancing and her prognosis would qualify her for an assisted death. Had it been law, she would have consented. Now 54 and in remission, she pleads this bill doesn't pass.
And earlier we heard from the Tory MP Danny Kruger. He's opposed to it too. He said he just could not support the idea of a state-sponsored death and said that this bill would change the way that we all die.
No man or woman is an island, and just as every person's death, even a good death, diminishes us all, it will impose on every person towards the end of their life, on everyone who could be thought to be near death and on their family, this new reality, the option of assisted suicide, the obligation to have the conversation around the bedside, in whispers in the corridor. Is it time? And it will change life and death for everyone. Let today not be a vote for despair, but the start of a proper debate about dying well, in which we have a better idea than a state suicide service, in which we remember that we have intrinsic value, that real choice and autonomy means having access to the best care possible and the fullest control over what happens to you while you live, that true dignity consists in being cared for to the end.
That was Tory MP Danny Kruger just there. And what's been clear to me, James, from listening to this, is that there are a lot of reservations on both sides of the chamber about the huge implications of this. And of course, it's totally right, and we should really be defending the rights of MPs to raise their concerns about a possible new law. It's clearly something the public wants to talk about. All of the polling says how much in favour people want to see a change in the law. And of course, it's important to say as well, it's a huge, huge change, potentially as big as the Abortion Act. I don't think we've ever sort of discussed something that's had quite a momentous change since that. We heard from the mother of the house, Diane Abbott. She'd been talking about how she believes the state shouldn't be involved in taking life. She thinks the safeguards around this bill just aren't sufficient. And you heard earlier from Henry, earlier today on your programme, he said that his mind had been completely changed after seeing this all, close up when he went to visit the Netherlands, seeing it all there. But it's clear this is going to have a huge impact, not just for the courts, not just for the NHS, but for all of us. And there are lots of questions being asked of MPs about exactly what that would look like.
And we don't know how it's going to go, do we? We don't know how the vote's going to go for precisely the reasons that you've just highlighted.
I think it's going to be really close.
Have you followed the whole thing?
Pretty much, yeah.
Can I ask you whether it's what you would do if you were an MP, or if you're in exactly the same position that you were before you started listening to the debate? That's also a valid answer without telling me what that position is.
It's so powerful listening to all of the debate. I think in principle I totally agree with the idea of assisted dying. I agree that we as individuals should have the choice about how to end our own life, but I am also sharing a lot of the concerns that MPs are raising today, and I don't know if enough has been done to convince me that all of those safeguards and everything has been done to close all the loopholes for people that might abuse it, or that, just that it's going to have an impact on our NHS, on our courts already backlogged. Again, these are not arguments not to do it, but these are considerations. I'd be really torn if I were an MP today sitting in the chamber. I find myself really, really compelled.
More torn than you were at 9 o'clock this morning?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, honestly, some of them are really, really powerful to hear. And I think, if you're an MP that's undecided, just go and listen to some of the powerful contributions of your colleagues. And Kim Ladbeater has today said that she's open to making some changes to the law if it does get through. And this is just the start of a conversation. That's her argument today. That being said, I do think the mood music is that it probably will pass. I was speaking to somebody last night who thinks it's going to be quite close, potentially between around 30 to 50 MPs in it. But I think it feels like we could be about to see a really momentous day in Parliament where this does go through.
And we'll find out shortly after 2:30 today.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you, Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor there, talking you through some of the, as she quite rightly says, most momentous potential legislation that has found itself being debated in the House of Commons in a generation. And I hadn't thought of that element either, the idea that the conversation would be closed off once again for another generation or for another decade in the event of the bill being defeated at 2:30 today. Chloe writes, James, to steer us back to the conversation we were having before, you should set up a free dating app for your listeners. It's funny you should say that, Chloe, actually. But I got shown a dating profile the other day by a young woman who was holding a picture of one of my books in her profile. I thought, well, that's going to cut out a lot of nonsense, isn't it? You're unlikely to be attracting any Andrew Tate disciples if you're reading one of my books in your dating profile. And I was reminded of the case of another young colleague who was working on this programme and Eddie Mair's programme at the time, and who added to his profile on his dating profile that he was working as an assistant producer on this programme. And his likes went through the roof. They absolutely exploded. And he was telling the truth, of course. Which would be pretty hard to something pretty hard to lie about. So back to this question of why we think they're dipping or what the actual reality is. Emily is in Tower Hamlets. Emily, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
I've been on Hinge for I think 2 months now, and it's definitely been very interesting for me because of the sort of like what the apps. The way it's been set up is like everything is merely based on looks.
Right.
And I think it's, especially after I was listening to what the other guy said about how, like, you know, COVID affected people.
Yes, I hadn't thought of that, but it's obvious when you think about it. You lose you don't flex your muscles, your socialising muscles, let alone your dating and your flirting muscles.
Absolutely. And everything was sort of pictures and, you know, sending like things over text, and it's definitely made me realise that people are less prone to ask about sort of hobbies and like what you like to do. It's obviously like the picture comes up and that's the first thing that people see, and it's often just complimenting like based on looks, and you don't really get to know people as well as you used to, I guess.
So what are you going to do? I mean, have you had any happy experiences?
Well, I'm quite new to the whole thing, but I mean, there's a massive variety of people. I mean, I'm in London, so you have a great
Makes
mix
life
of
a bit
people.
easier, doesn't it?
But yeah, I mean, I've had 2 experiences so far. One was pretty bad because it was just like the whole Andrew Tate thing made me laugh because it's like the guys sort of like, I don't know. I guess they just go into the app wanting to sort of mess around. The idea of like a serious relationship doesn't really occur to most people that I've spoken to. I guess it's some people use it as an excuse to just meet new people and, you know.
Of course. So do you think you're going to? I mean, do you think you're going to stick it out, or are you already reaching the end of your patience?
Reaching the end of my tether. I mean, I think I'm interested in sticking with it. But then again, like I don't really, I have a job where most of it is like just the team is women, and I don't really meet a lot of other people. I mean, like I want to go into the acting industry and like hopefully I'll sort of meet people through there. But until then, it's kind of the only thing that I have.
I mean, it's not easy this as in terms of someone trying to learn about it, because the COVID angle, the lockdown angle, would arguably push more people towards these ways of meeting people. But perhaps the people that have been pushed there since lockdown, this would explain why the numbers went down in 2023, are looking for a lot more than what they, I don't know, previous users might have been looking for, or have got higher expectations or less realistic expectations because of the gap in your social life, the gap in your personal experience. It's quite poignant, actually, as you describe it, Emily. I mean, I wish you well. I can completely see why people of your age are beginning increasingly to think, which is a part of this research that Ofcom have looked at, increasingly to think that a meeting in person is much more likely to prove fruitful than a meeting online. I guess for old gits like me, the mystery is why it wasn't always like that. What happened in that intervening period where more and more people were getting together online than they were IRL.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:48 is the time. I love this story out of Ireland regarding Kneecap. Kneecap are the Irish language rap group that I was telling you about, because they feature in an absolutely incredible new film. Well, it's not even new anymore, but they have a film which is called, predictably enough, Kneecap. And they have successfully won a discrimination case against Kemi Badenoch when she was a politician with a ministerial brief before becoming leader of the opposition, and she took away funding. I mean, they're culturally significant for a whole heap of reasons, not least the dissemination of the Irish language. But a wonderful story. So UK government found to have acted unlawfully. So Kemi Badenoch, who refused to give them a grant while she was a minister in the previous Tory government, has found to have acted in an unlawful and procedurally unfair way. So, back in 2014, Louise Haigh failed to reveal to the authorities that she had actually found a phone she'd previously thought to have been among the belongings that were stolen during a vicious mugging, and that has prompted a ministerial resignation. Kemi Badenoch, while in office as a Conservative minister, has been found to have acted in an unlawful and procedurally unfair way. And I don't generally look at the papers on Saturdays, but I wonder. What do you reckon? Good on Thomas for sticking it in our bulletins. He's probably seen the film. It's an absolute cracker. It's one of the most extraordinary films you'll see in your life. And by an amazing twist of fate, it was so good I stayed for the credits because the music was playing throughout the credits. And then this blooming name pops up at the end. It says directed by Rich Pepiat. And I thought, that can't be. Well, then how many Rich Pepiats can there be? And it was the same with Rich Pepiat, as a lad I used to work with when he was on the Daily Star. I was on the Daily Express, maybe a little bit later than that. And he went off and made a film called One Rogue Reporter, which remains the bravest attempt to lift the lid on the sewer that the print media had become by this point. By the time One News of the World reporter was jailed over phone hacking, and they attempted to pass it off as a scandal confined to one rogue reporter, but Rich went rogue. I mean, there's no one as passionate, is there, as a poacher turned gamekeeper? But he just went rogue, and he went after. If you watch it on YouTube, seriously, it's extraordinary, the ease with which he takes these people who are used to exercising enormous power over celebrities and normal members of the public, these big shot tabloid journalists and tabloid editors, and Pepiat just skins them all one by one. It's an extraordinary piece. And I was wondering, probably about 6 or 7 months ago, I was wondering what he was up to. And I'm sitting in a cinema watching an absolutely brilliant film, and then right at the end, up pops his name. It's supposed to be coming in, actually, but I think we'll wait until he wins an Oscar, which he might. 12:51 is the time. Back to dating. Tom's in Stuttgart. Tom, what would you like to say?
Yes, James, big fan.
Thank you, mate.
I would say I think that dating apps are a bit depressing, like extremely depressing, actually.
How old are you?
I'm 23 now.
Right. Why? Why are they depressing? Why do you use that word?
I think they're not representative of real life. I think in real life I have a lot more. I've had zero success completely on dating apps, but in real life it seems to be. I think maybe because I'm not very good at texting or what, I don't know, but I think it's also skewed against men in a way, because I think there's a lot more men using dating apps because a lot more men want sex, probably.
Well, I guess it's a self-perpetuating prophecy then, isn't it? Because the more men are on there kind of not really looking for a relationship, then the more women are going to clock that, like our last caller has, like Emily, and they're going to move on and start doing other things. It's weird.
Having said that, I don't think all women are on dating apps looking for a relationship as well.
Do you know? No, that might be me being a bit old-fashioned, or even sort of benign misogyny, thinking that women are all looking to get married and men are all looking to get laid.
Yeah, well, I think it's just there's less women. Maybe, I don't know. It must be because.
Are you still on them? Do you still swipe?
No. I mean, I thought, I'll find women through other means, but my interests, I'm an engineer, and my hobbies include mixed martial arts, so like, it doesn't really lend well to meeting women, but...
No, I suppose not. And it's a generational thing. Thank you, mate. Take care. 12:53 is the time. You're right. Dave's picking up on this. I need the extraordinary police. Just a quick head wobble, James. You're overdoing the extraordinary again. I think you're right. Although on this occasion, the film, it fits. James has been in touch, another one, to say that Rich Pepiat was on the Paper Cuts podcast recently. Came across as a great guy. This is ridiculous. I should be getting paid for doing his PR in this fashion. But I don't know why. I think this is one of the most interesting things about growing up. Is that I would have once, was it Gore Vidal who said that a small part of you dies when a friend succeeds? And I used to think that was true, but now when I see someone from back in the day smashing it, it just makes me feel fantastic. Oh, we must do full disclosure, because it is a guest this week who has a frankly extraordinary story to tell. Lola Young sits in the House of Lords now. People my age might remember her presenting Play School or being the next door neighbour on Metal Mickey. But for the first... she was fostered in extraordinary circumstances as a young black girl by a white woman, but informally, as it were. And she has gone on that journey involving finding papers about her background. And it's an incredible book called 8 Weeks. And she is an incredible woman who is this week's guest on Full Disclosure.
1989, this act was passed, which I think... don't hold me to it, but I think helped to make a bit more parity between children in the care system and adopted children, because I think there's always been that sort of, for a long time, there's been that possibility with adopted children finding out who they were. But for kids in the care system, not until 1989. And then, and as I say, I only found this out in whenever it was, through Sal. And I thought, well, there are some questions that I've had that I've sort of suppressed over the years. Like, how come my mother and father were together like this? I've had different stories and different ideas put
No one
forward.
you could ask, really?
No one I could really ask, no, because everybody had died, to be quite honest with you. And so it's like, where would I even find this out? So this idea of the records, I thought maybe I could get some of those answers from there.
And it was about... Would identity be too strong a word? Or it's a relationship between curiosity and identity, isn't there?
Yeah, this thing about identity, it's so... What's the phrase? It does a lot of heavy lifting, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So, and people are very kind of sort of linear when they think about identity. You're either this or you're that. And if you're that, you can't be this as well. So my identity, insofar as it was there... I related very strongly to being a Londoner, because that was the one point of stability, and to being black, of course. Maybe not so much female when I was younger, although there were certain things I wanted to do I couldn't do. But this thing about being in care was a big part of my identity and still is. So it wasn't so much a search for identity in that sense, because I think I had cut myself off from this idea that I had family and parents in any kind of, any way that kind of touched convention.
As a self-protection.
Yeah, I think, certainly initially that's how it started, absolutely. Because, they don't want me, so I don't want them, and I don't need them.
Baroness Lola Young there, talking about her life, as people often do on Full Disclosure, but talking about her new book, 8 Weeks, as well, which... is you'll find out why. I'll tell you a little secret. I know you sometimes like the lifting of the bonnet on interviews and interview techniques. So sometimes when I'm preparing for an interview, I don't do huge amounts of research, because I think sometimes that leaves you thinking, I must cram that in and I must cram that in and I must cram that in. Whereas I prefer on Full Disclosure to let the conversation sort of unspool naturally, organically, as it were. But I came up with a question before I sat down with Lola, and I thought, I wonder if I'm going to have the guts to ask this question. Guts isn't quite the right word, but, I wonder if it's going to feel right. This is a question I really want to know the answer to. And you'll be able to tell, if you listen to the podcast, exactly which question it was and why the response explains why I was a little bit wary of asking it. But I'm very glad that I did. I'm not sure she was, but I'm very, very glad that I did, because I find, as you know, as an adopted person, I find the relationships between nature and nurture, biology, curiosity, identity, survival personality, abandonment, all of these things absolutely fascinating. And My job, of course, is to make them fascinating to people who don't necessarily have much personal investment in the issues or any investment in it at all, because you don't need to have an investment to have an interest. For example, we've been talking about dating apps for the last hour. I've got no investment or interest whatsoever. Well, I've got an investment in them, and I now have enormous interest. But that conversation is over, because so is the show. If you missed any of today's show, oh, hang on. Starmer blames blank for migrant chaos. You know this, because you're probably going to... Do you know this?
Starmer blames blank for migrant chaos.
Yeah.
Tories.
What's the missing word? No. It's brilliant, this. This was today's missing word round.
Starmer blames blank. No idea.
Brexit.
Oh.
Starmer blames Brexit for migrant chaos. We may find a way into that conversation next week, but for now...
To quote you at yourself.
Yeah.
Oh.
Download it now for free, the Global Player, of course, where you can find a range of podcasts as well as radio. You can pause and rewind, and you can do so by heading to globalplayer.com.
James O'Brien on LBC.